all of it is a pipeline that leads into conspiracy. And if you believe in one conspiracy, chances are you're going to believe in a lot more. And it's really not long when you start going down these rabbit holes that, like, you know, it's like, oh, you know, the pyramids were built by aliens. And then, like, oh, someone's covering it up.
There were studies coming out that the more you deplatform these people, they go to Gab and then they just get more extreme over there. To what extent have, like, we created the problem, or is it they're no chicken and egg?
When I was 16, I was like fully on the alt-right pipeline. Like, it was early stages, but I was absolutely in it. I don't think that Graham Hancock is racist. I'm sure there are people who will argue with me on that, debate me on that, but the theory of Atlantis and things like that have roots in racist theory.
You're careful what you put into your body. What Joe Rogan supplement did you just buy? Yeah, get out of here, right? I don't trust the experimental vaccines, but you better believe I love those monoclonal antibodies. Like,
most people with anxiety don't have crazy conspiracy theories that they believe in.
Yeah,
Although
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised to find out that most conspiracy theorists have high anxiety at the same time.
I'm sure they'd tell you that, you know, I am one of the, you know, archaeological cabal who's being paid by the Smithsonian to lie to you, which I wish I was. I'm a Google debunker.
Elon Musk is who George Soros was supposed to be, right? He's a foreigner who bought a publicly traded social media platform. He took it private by using foreign money to purchase it, and now there's no transparency into it, and he posts all of his far-right public opinions on the platform in a way that no other large social media... Like,
ironically, we're actually falling into the exact same trap that's really the problem with this, is we're not even talking about archaeology anymore. The last of it has just been politics and psychology and the way that, you know, like, radicalization works and stuff.
Hello everybody, welcome to Bridges. We are joined today by Milo. He is a YouTuber who does archaeology, debunks conspiracy. I think I saw environmental scientist on the list there somewhere too.
You sure did, yes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And your channel is MiniMinuteMan.
Yes, my channel is MiniMinuteMan. So, that's correct. My name is Milo ROSSI. I'm an archaeologist, environmental scientist, and science communicator. I work primarily on YouTube. Most of what I do is discussing archaeology, Earth history, and natural science topics, but probably the thing that I'm the most well known for is discussing and debunking pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-history, and various conspiracy theories. So,
is this an archaeology coded uniform right now?
I was going to say, you're super dripped out.
Yeah. I know I am repping some of my own merch at the moment. I have my Cave of Swimmers pendant, but other than that, I think I accidentally, you know, Indiana Jones has just bled into my fashion sense. So
just really like linen.
Yeah, exactly, linen. There's something about the texture, you know, linen and leather.
Feels free and thoughtful. Yes.
What got you into archaeology?
Archaeology I consider as being kind of one of my oldest interests. So one of the very first things I can remember being really interested in as a kid was Ötzi the Iceman. So when I was about, I think between 4 and 5 years old, I found an issue of National Geographic that talked about him. For those of you that don't know, Ötzi is a more than 5,000-year-old ice mummy found in the Italian Alps. He is the oldest wet mummy ever discovered, and he is an amazing window into what life was like for, kind of Bronze Age Europe.
What's a wet mummy? Sorry?
A wet mummy is a mummy that has been preserved in a wet environment. So it was like an icy environment. So where you think of, the mummies in Egypt, those are dry mummies where they've been desiccated. So a wet mummy, in the case of Ötzi being, mummified at the foot of a glacier, the museum that he's kept in right now, he has to be kept at, I can't remember what the temperature is, something super low and like 98% humidity, or else he would just instantly like decompose. Instantly is relative. But so it's a pretty unique discovery, but I was really fascinated by it. He has some of the oldest tattoos in the world, and I remember, being really interested by him when I first saw him. Maybe it's that morbid curiosity, and my dad took me to the library, and we printed out all the articles we could on the proto-internet, and I remember him reading them to me and highlighting things, and that was really what kicked it off. My family is originally from northeastern Pennsylvania, so there's a lot of coal mining there, and so some of my first experience kind of actually in the field was going there and finding all these fossils and shale piles. So these are dating back to the Carboniferous period, a little more than 300 million years ago. So not exactly archaeology, but something that really piqued my interest in history, natural history, and really the history of this planet.
The first things I found were 400 million years old, so,
Damn it.
I'm from Nebraska, not that impressive.
One thing I noticed, you're one of the few people that when I watch the YouTube channels, I don't typically bump up the speed.
Yeah, it's probably just because of how fast I talk,
Yeah. Well, exactly. Right? Most people I'm like, oh,
Jesus,
drive me crazy.
Yeah. I know, that's something I have to remind myself. I'm like, Milo, slow the hell down, So.
Do you, your path through school, PhD'd or?
Not yet, but
yet.
I'm working towards that. So right now, I currently just hold a bachelor's.
Okay.
So I attended the University of Maine, Orono. I originally went there for environmental science. So I have been interested in archaeology my whole life. I kind of consider myself as kind of having been studying it for my whole life in one degree or another. But when I went to high school, I went to a vocational high school, and there I was able to pick a major, a concentration, and I went with environmental science. So by the time I graduated high school, I had about 4,000 hours of experience in environmental science, and ended up pursuing that as my primary major when I went to college. Only after starting it and having a very inspiring teacher there did I kind of rekindle my passion for archaeology, and ended up adding that to my degree as well. So in the future, I do want to continue going for that and achieve some higher education in it. But right now, I'm my first 2 years out of college, so that's where I'm at right now.
How do you balance the desire to do academic work versus doing YouTube stuff? Not that the YouTube work isn't academic, but
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
that's an interesting question. I think that that's something that is it's definitely challenging to balance because it's such a new part of the space. One of the reasons that I was sort of steered away from doing archaeology as a major by my high school advisor and some of my other advisors was because you need to get a PhD before you can do literally anything. So it's not even really worth spending the time. You already have experience in environmental, so just do that. So I'm in this unusual position now where with the experience that I do have, I have been able to make a really large splash in the archaeology space. And so that was something that I never even dreamed possible without having, sort of a PhD and things like that. So, every time I've talked to, former professors, mentors and other people in the archaeology world, they're like, you're killing it. Just whatever you're doing, just keep doing that. So I think that when it comes to actually pursuing that higher education right now, I have a strong enough head of steam that I want to continue doing this. And I do anticipate going back at some point to really just be able to further my understanding and to be able to just develop my network a little bit. But right now, I feel like I'm far from the ceiling of what I'm working on right now with YouTube.
Do you think other people in your field or in the higher education space ever feel resentful or express that in regards to your popularity being on YouTube and not, Yeah,
that's a good question. I was worried they would be, but I honestly have not found that at all. If anything, I feel like it's been kind of the opposite. People have been thrilled to see that there has been a lot of interest in the archaeology world, and there's been so much interest in my channel. I mean, something that archaeology has had a challenging time doing, I think, is really being able to engage effectively with a pop audience, which is why pseudo-archaeology and things like that end up becoming so popular, because the academics can have a really hard time translating a lot of their topics beyond the field of a classroom or other scholars. And so most of what I've found is pretty much every professional I've talked to has been over the moon at the response and reception that my channel has been getting.
Does that make it easier if you're I don't know if you're in masters, but applying for masters, can you cite your YouTube channel as I wouldn't say, because it's not academic work precisely, and I don't know what the application for the master's process would be for archaeology, but there's some level of overlap between obviously your channel and experience that otherwise people get in research and reading topics and doing lit reviews and stuff. I imagine every time you do a video, you're doing a certain amount of lit review, essentially.
Completely.
And you do a lot of citations as well. I'm not sure which style. Is it APA or Chicago?
Well, since I'm not doing too much writing, most of what I do is I'll just have on-screen citation of reference number, and then I'll have that referenced in the description with links so that you can go to those papers yourself. So it's a little different than publishing a paper.
So you wouldn't show that off to your prof?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, can you utilize any of that? Because that's a really interesting area. I've had a couple of psych people as well mention to me, being do you think if I had a psych YouTube that did well, I could include it in my application? And so far I've been I probably wouldn't, but
yeah. I think absolutely. I think that looking at what I have done in the last few years, I am immensely proud of it. It has garnered a very large reception and very good reception from a lot of people in the archaeology world who are thrilled to see these topics being communicated to millions of people. And so I think those numbers sort of speak for themselves, where I do put my best foot forward of the research that I do, making sure that I cross my T's and dot my I's, even when I slip up, making sure that I am able to correct those mistakes, and working with as many professionals as possible who do have more experience in the field, so that I'm using my platform to elevate what they've worked on as well. So something that I really try and do is, as fun as it is to do my debunking content and sort of be the punchy snarkyologist, something that I really try and focus more on is I've really been trying to focus more on talking about topics that are less related to conspiracy. So actually talking about, real archaeological topics, bringing other professionals into the fold. I've done work at the Penn Museum. I've been on site in, Göbekli Tepe, at Karahan Tepe. So I've been places that are actual, resume builders and sort of working in archaeology beyond just kind of standing in a room talking about it and, making jokes, and drinking a beer. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you can kind of cite it. I'm super curious because a lot of people, we talked a little bit with Flint about this, but talking about essentially like an expert and like what makes an expert. I imagine you must get do you get a lot of criticism of being like, you're not even an archaeologist, like you don't have a PhD, anything like that? Or because you're citing so strongly, maybe it doesn't
The only people that I ever get that from are pseudo-archaeologists who have even less credentials. So it's water off my back.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you think there isn't this like appeal to authority that essentially like you technically don't have without the PhD and stuff? Why do you think people don't mind that? Do you think it's a descriptor of the field, or do you think people understand essentially they can kind of respect research regardless of like the level of lettering behind somebody's name?
I think that it would be something like that. So, kind of what you said there, where I do have experience in the field. It's also not like I have not done anything in archaeology, like I've never taken a class in it, and I'm speaking as, an authority figure. So I have experience in archaeology. I did study it, and I've been interested in it my whole life. And because of that, I have a basis of knowledge, a foundation of knowledge that I apply to my work. So even when we were getting ready for this video and you were asking about those pyramids that were up there, I have no problem saying, I don't know about those pyramids. I didn't study Egyptology. Egyptology is not something I'm super passionate about. And so I'm not going to act like I'm an authority figure in that field. And people trust that because I'm not willing to step beyond what my base of knowledge is to try and act like I know something that I don't. And that's really, I think, where the credential problem becomes an issue when it comes to pseudo-archaeology, is I don't think that there's anything wrong with people not having PhDs, having a voice in the field. In fact, I think that's something that's really important because it makes it feel like it's something that's accessible to everyone. Like it makes people watch and be like, oh, I can actually do that. Like they'll listen to me. But when you get, a lot of these pseudo-archaeology people who don't have any credentials, they are not like, posing theories and kind of like putting a couple ideas out there. They are speaking as if they are a greater authority figure than people who actually do have experience in it. So what I do is I'm not going out and being a rogue, doing like my own digs and trying like publish my own faked papers. I am using my base of knowledge and understanding, analyzing the papers that have already been published by other professionals in the field, and being able to use my understanding to convey that knowledge to a broader audience.
Yeah.
I don't think people actually ever care about the authority. I think it's more what it's doing, because when it comes to misinformation, people are so excited when they can cite a single doctor or a single PhD that will support whatever dumb stuff they believe in. But when they don't have that person, well, I mean, it's academia. It's all bought and paid for, or it's all rigged anyway. So who cares? So people are very quick with whether they agree with authority or they don't agree with authority. Like, oh, well, I think it's important because I've got a doctor that agrees with me. Okay, well, what about the fact that 99% of doctors disagree with him? Okay, well, actually, authority sucks. Like, okay.
Yep.
I also think there's a huge issue with oh shoot, I just had this and I read something different. Sorry, God.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, that's kind of a fallacy that I think we see a lot when it comes to this field, is that idea of that hasty generalization, where you see it a lot in pseudoscience, pseudo-archaeology, where, like, oh, well, this one scientist said this thing, or like this researcher said this thing, well, then like everyone else is wrong. Or like, big archaeology is all saying this one thing, well, they're bought and paid for, Yeah. And so like, it really is a kind of challenging conversation to even have. And I've thought about it, a lot, doing what I do, like working with the people that I work with. And like, I don't even really have a perfect, concise thesis on, expertise and credentials. I think it's very important, but
yeah. Yeah. I was going to say on the credential part, the most painfully obvious time for me when I'm realizing that whatever credentials somebody's citing are bullshit, whether they have them or not, is when somebody cites their credentials. I think that it is one of the most annoying. I've run into this so many times where somebody will just start rattling off like, oh, well, I'm PhD'd in, XYZ. Okay, we'll demonstrate that. Like, my background is kind of art. I did music in school for 3 years. Everybody that does any kind of art, when you're going into a school, you audition. Nobody cares what you scored on your final recital, but you have to play an audition piece. And I imagine it's probably the same for photography or for acting or anything else. You probably have an acting audition, or you probably have a portfolio or whatever. And the idea that I just can't ever imagine being in a debate with somebody or an argument, or you're trying to debunk something, and you're like, well, actually, I'm right because I've read this book. And it's like, okay, well, summarize it for us. Like, are you going to go ahead and say something about it rather than just like, nebulously citing off to either a degree or a piece of work that you can't remember any part of? That's such a frustrating thing to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that really is, kind of the crux of it, is that like you lead by example, where it's like, I could get up there and say that I have a PhD and then just spout some bullshit. Like, and that's obviously not what a lot of people are doing. Science is supposed to be a self-correcting field where, you work to get a PhD and you earn it because it is something where like you have had to go through the hurdles in order to make sure that you are doing good science. So it obviously is a good system, a system that can be taken advantage of, and there are people who are in it who maybe don't deserve it. But by and large, I think it's a very well, done system. But, again, as I kind of said earlier in this, the only people that have ever, attacked credentials or anything like that are people who are in the pseudo-archaeology world. And that's because I think they just have a very flawed understanding of, what academics need to hear in order to listen to it, where they do think that like, oh, well, like if you don't have a PhD, then, no one's actually going to listen to you and your point is moot, which is ironic when they don't even listen to people that do have PhDs,
Sure.
So it's like, which one is it? So, things like that, it's a whole bit of a mess, but at least that's kind of the way that I view it.
Yeah, they'll act like it's just a big PhD circle jerk, and like a lot of these guys, especially like in philosophy, like people make a whole career just writing papers back and forth to each other, arguing. Card and Borehouse have been arguing about immigration and minimum wage for 20 years. It's like people will do these things forever, but yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite things about YouTube, like coming from a more traditional academic background, is that like even within, maybe this hasn't been your experience, but within my experience, there was like kind of that elitism of the letters, right? Where it's like, well, if this person has more letters than you, they're obviously just like better at all the things. And it's like, well, it's a pretty good heuristic to assume that they're more informed. That would make sense. They've probably done twice as much school as you. But the issue is you can find a PhD to say anything, right? There's a PhD. Not all PhDs are the same. Definitely not all PsyDs are the same, right? And so it's really, really important to understand, especially with YouTube and just with the amount of information that people have at their hand, I feel like understanding what a PhD traditionally even meant, not just as a heuristic, but like the epistemic groundwork that was built into somebody with a doctorate of philosophy, right? Because a really core component of probably any field that does research, you can maybe speak outside of just my field, but is learning what is pseudoscience, what's the research method, what is a hypothesis, what's basic science, what's applied science, like all these really fun, how do you think about like conflicting data? How do you think about, I'm running on like low brain juice right now, but basically when there's like an extra variable that may be conflicting with correlational data, I don't know why I can't think of the word, it starts with C, but anyways, you're like aware of all of these little issues that you need to be thinking about.
Confounding variable.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I wasn't remembering that. I was like, I know it's a C, but I just want to say conflict, and that's not it. And I feel like that's like one of the most important things that kind of gets lost in the age of information is the really fundamental groundwork of not just what the info is, but how to think and engage with the information that you're learning.
That is a really excellent point. You summed it up really well. And I think to build off that a little bit is science is a language. You have to be taught to speak it. And that's something that isn't meant to sound gatekeepy of like, if you didn't go to college, you can't be a scientist, because that's just absolutely not true. Anyone who tells you that is completely full of it. But the issue is that there is sort of a level of experience that you need to have to be able to process, say, a scientific paper or something like that. I mean, I'm sure that all of us have lost track of the amount of times we have seen scientific papers just completely bastardized, taken out of context. You find that one study from some, BS thing from a long time ago that, backs up the thing you're trying to say, but it says PhD on it, so you go for it. Science is, it's supposed to be self-correcting. It's supposed to have a lot of checks and balances in place to make sure good information is put out there, but it all comes down to the person interpreting it. And a lot of pseudoscientists and pseudo-archaeologists are people who don't have a large formal training in the scientific world, and because of that, they have a sort of flawed approach to actually like understanding and comprehending these papers. And so that's why I really think that like you don't need a PhD to bat in this space. You just need some experience in like science, even if that's your own learned experience. I know creators who bat hugely above their weight in the archaeology space online who are high school dropouts, and they're amazing, and they make great content that is, as I said earlier, dotted the I's, crossed the T's. They're amazing. They have the backing of actual PhD'd archaeologists and stuff like that. that because they actually put in the effort and they care enough to look through these papers. I find that my experience with science of the last 8, almost 9 years of my life doing it formally, I have been able to kind of learn how to speak that language. And really it's my ability to, look at scientific papers, to analyze them well, to be able to identify what's good and what isn't, that gives you the most leverage in being able to make sure that you're putting good information into the world. I think another thing that people don't really think about a lot is when it comes to that like PhD and all that, a PhD is really specific. Like I, went to school and, I was in my paleoecology class, fascinating class. It was really interesting, really inspiring, talking about the ecology of New England after the end of the last ice age. We can look at bog samples, core samples that show the pollen layers that fell into the bog year after year. So you can see how trees migrated north as, like the rocks slowly began to get covered with moss and ferns and all this. And as we were talking about that, we were looking at papers that were written by people who have their PhD purely in like, I think they're called like pollen sporophytes or something like that. And like, that's it. So would that person who, like, if I had a degree in pollen sporophytes and talked about all the exact same things I do right now, would people take me more seriously because I say PhD? So that's obviously not to discredit someone who has a PhD. They know more about pollen sporophytes than I ever will, and I will consult them to be able to learn what they have learned. But having a PhD does not give you in my opinion at least, a much larger general base of knowledge than if you had gone for your bachelor's or even your master's. A PhD is really to narrow it down on something and that it's diminishing returns to the entire field, in my opinion. Maybe that's a hot take, but that's kind of the way that I view it.
Yeah, it makes me think of, there's that quote, like, jack of all trades, master of none. I think the full quote is like, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but I prefer a jack of all trades than a master of one, or something like that, right?
Yes.
This idea of, like, essentially, it feels like, especially in North America, and probably Europe as well, there's been this increasing fixation on specialization, because specialization, especially as your population grows, leads to high efficiency, right? If you've got one guy who's really, really good at making switches, all you want that guy to do in a system that's efficient is to make amazing switches.
Make me the best damn switch.
Best damn switches ever. But now in like the era of information where people are accessing more and more info, it feels like we need to kind of go back and go, how do you build a good jack of all trades? Like, how do you build a generalist who's good at thinking about the world in a generalized way and kind of applying a good epistemic system that can apply across the sciences while acknowledging you're not an expert in any of them, and knowing like when and how to go to the experts to fill in all of the information that you're missing in between. Yeah,
and having that diversity of understanding, I think, is super important. I remember when I was kind of in college and I was beginning to, add archaeology to my field and things like that, I was kicking myself for not picking a school based on archaeology and picking one based on environmental science. And I kind of grudgingly went through it. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad that I went for environmental science and that I added archaeology after, because I love environmental science and really I love natural history. And me studying environmental science had given me such a wonderful breadth of knowledge for understanding natural history. And that's something that, like, for example, one of my most recent videos talking about the Green Sahara, like, that is a video that talks for maybe about like 10 minutes of its almost hour runtime about archaeology. The rest is talking about natural systems, climate systems, the way that like the Milankovitch cycles affect the weather patterns. I wouldn't have that expertise if I had not gone to school for that, and if I hadn't been kind of taught in that base of knowledge of it. So like, I really do think that having there's a reason I don't just call myself an archaeologist or an environmental scientist. I'm kind of both. I have, I don't want to put myself in a box because I think that I have a really wide range of not only expertise, but also interest. And I don't want to talk about just one thing yet. Like, a major reason I haven't decided to go for my PhD is not only that I feel like I'm really like, excelling in this kind of brand new space of, the classroom that is, the internet, but also because I don't know what I'd want my pollen sporophytes to be yet. I don't know what that one thing is that I really want to focus in on. I've thought about, this would still kind of be archaeology, but, a little bit different. I've thought about doing something, with conspiracy and pseudoscience. I think that there's a real place to be able to like approach that from a purely like academic standpoint and do like a PhD in like combating pseudoscience and understanding the psychology of what makes people like, fall into these traps. So I haven't, crossed that threshold yet, but it's something I'm definitely thinking about.
Have you looked into like Metascience then at all?
Honestly,
what you're
not
talking
really.
about, I had a supervisor that was his specialty was pseudoscience, actually.
Metascience, explain that to me.
So Metascience is like it's like a new branch of science. It's the study of science itself.
Oh, interesting.
It's amazing.
Wow,
so
Metascience, I get it. Okay.
Yeah, but it's basically, so like one metascientist, there's actually a metascientist in Tampa that is in psychology, and his research is focused exclusively on comparing self-reports to EEGs, brain EEGs, to basically look at like actions spike potentials and stuff to kind of create basically like a software system that can more biologically base self-reports, because self-reports are like the greatest bane of psychology because it's all we use, and also they're kind of garbage a lot of the time. They're really rough, right? And so that's like a form of metascience, is like it's analyzing the science and practice itself. So a lot of, I think the amyloid plaque guy who found that the amyloid plaque theory was just false for the last like 13 years in Alzheimer's, I think he's a meta-scientist as well, which sounds like might interest you. I don't know if there's an archaeology meta-science version, but I'm sure there is.
Get back to me in a couple of years, maybe there will be.
Yeah, you can make, hey, honestly, there's lots of people. Jonathan Haidt basically just made his field of psychology, so why not?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you fall into a trap of being too destructive instead of constructive when you're talking about archaeology? Like, are there ever times where you're like, man, wasting time on debunking conspiracies is not very fulfilling. I wish I was talking about like cool aspects of archaeology instead of just, fighting with people. What percentage of your content like even is the debunking stuff? I
absolutely fall into that trap. That's something that has been really challenging for me. I love what I do. I love doing my debunking. It's really the thing that kind of, gained me notoriety in the beginning. And it's really fun. But the difficulty with that is the moment you bring an individual into it, it, kind of turns into a boxing match. And, if somebody doesn't agree with you in the beginning and they think you're kind of an asshole, they're not going to agree with you by the end, no matter how many papers and sources you've presented them with. And that's something that I am keenly aware of. And that's why I try and do a little bit of a two-pronged approach. I talked about this in the talk that I gave at Virginia Tech, how the two sort of approaches I try and take is debunk that pseudo-archaeology, debunk that pseudoscience, but also to just focus videos on teaching actual science and actual archaeology and actual history. Because I think that the greatest tool that scientists have to combat pseudo-archaeology and pseudoscience is to teach the actual truth of it and get out ahead of the pseudoscientists, because once a general population has been able to understand and digest these topics for themselves, they'll be a lot less susceptible to falling for it in the future. It's a lot easier to give people the tools they need to identify pseudoscience so they don't fall for it in the first place than it is to change their minds once they've already been convinced of it and sort of radicalized with it.
So it's like inoculation almost.
Exactly. So that's a really challenging thing. And then kind of the flip side of that coin is it's also a hard thing to do, because in the creator space, as I'm sure you know, people love a dogfight. And so it's really challenging when I'll put, a lot of work into a video that does just kind of talk about history or science or archaeology, and there's no, controversy in it, because it just simply doesn't do as well. And that's a really challenging thing when, your money is based on views. So, yeah.
When people are engaging in misinformation around archaeology, what do you think are some of the critical thinking errors that they're committing? Why do you think people fall into these traps?
Oh, that is an excellent question. There's a few of them. I think probably one of the largest ones, I was going to write it down earlier and I absolutely should have. I think that there's a couple. One is straw man. Straw man is classic, but it happens a lot of people, saying that if you think this, then you must think this thing. You're saying that by criticizing pseudo-archaeology, you're saying that we need to silence it and ban it, and you're silencing freedom of speech, which is no one's saying that. I'm just doing your research for you. That's a completely different thing. I also think that there's the hasty generalization fallacy that I kind of brought up earlier, where people are very quick to be here is a time when science was wrong, and therefore all of science is wrong, which sort of brings it into this idea that there is almost a comparison to be made between actual scientific theory and pseudoscience. Both of them have an equal chance of actually being correct. I'm handling this in the upcoming video that I'm doing on my response to Philip Ziba, where one of the things he says is I talk about space facts and things like that, and then I also talk about the theory that the pyramids might have been a power plant, and at the end of the day both of those are just theories, which is such it completely flattens it. It flattens both of the arguments to a point where now it doesn't mean anything anymore. Where yes, I guess technically both of those are theories, but one of them is a very well supported scientific theory with papers backing it up. It ties into different parts of science, and the other one is a thing that some guy said and wrote in a book somewhere. So by claiming that those things are equal to one another, you're muddying the waters so much that there's no longer a distinction to be made, which kind of hurts everyone.
It's very frustrating. We're covering a lot of topics that we did earlier, but the way that people are incorrect on something is so instructive for what is going on in their mind. And I think people intuitively know this, but their mind gets a little bit, I don't want to say rotted, but their mind can be very poisoned against an idea if it's not advantageous for them to believe it for some other reason, for something unrelated to the topic. But the idea of like how a person is incorrect is just as important or more important if you've taken any higher level math. Generally, like in any big problem, it's like 2 out of 10 points is for the right answer, right? And if you show all your work and you're up correct to the very final step, you might get an 8 out of 10 on that particular problem, or at least when I had Calc, that's how they graded it. Some people will look at a person like doing something and they're very, oh God, there's so many concepts related to this. A lot of people are results oriented, which is strange, but it's like the worst way to evaluate whether or not something was good or bad is doing a retrospective analysis instead of a prospective analysis. So like, for instance, if you play poker, you can never look and see if you won or lost a hand to determine if your plays were good throughout it. You have to go back to that moment and you have to figure out the odds at every step of the way to know whether or not you were making a good or bad decision, right? Like every time I DUI and I come home alive, was that a good decision? I mean, no, it's not really, So people have a really bad time they have a bad time like working their way through problems and figuring out like, okay, well, they were both wrong, but like this guy was wrong after a painstaking process of like pretty epistemically valid work, and he followed good process, good procedure, and he messed up, versus this guy is just completely wrong.
Yeah.
And people know this intuitively, but when politics or social pressure or whatever gets involved, people just, their minds go crazy. I remember listening to Joe Rogan talking to, I don't remember who, but he brings up Alex Jones. And he's like, Alex Jones, the crazy thing about him is that he's right sometimes. And I'm like, if I were to sit across the table from you and flip a coin and predict heads every single time, and I'm right half the time, would you ever give me any credit for that ever? Like even a little bit of credit for that? No, of course not. Like what a stupid thing to say. No,
that's really well said. And it is, it's immensely frustrating. I think that, your analogy or your sort of example there of like being, at what point you start being wrong is very important. And that's something that I try and really hold up the mirror on in the work that I do, because, like in doing research, it is possible to make mistakes. I have made mistakes before. And, when I do that, I really try and make a point of, making a video or a statement or something, sort of correcting that, because that's the way that science works. I want people to know that like, it is okay to mess up every once in a while. We are human. That's fine. And also like, I want people to know that like, they can criticize. Like I really have to try my best to avoid, my base becoming, a cult of personality, where I'm like, I don't want to seem like an infallible figure in archaeology, because I am not. Like, I am absolutely not. In fact, I don't think there is anyone that is. But there are people who are so dead set on thinking that their way of thinking is absolutely right. And like you said earlier about like, you can tell a lot of how a person thinks by the way they're wrong. Because pseudoscience does that all the time, where they do this whole thing of saying like, oh, well, the scientists want you to think that they are 100% wrong or 100% right all of the time, and that like there's never any room to question it, which again, hasty generalization, that's absolutely not true, and a straw man actually, now that I think about it. But like that just isn't true. That absolutely is not true. I don't think I've ever met a scientist in my life who has said that we have figured out, the fundamental truth of the universe. That just doesn't exist yet.
There's also a much different meaning when people say things that are really deep into a field than when a layman says it. So like if a physician or somebody that studies neuroscience says something like, we really don't know how anesthesia works, right? We know a lot about how anesthesia works, right? Like we know that it slows down the synapses or whatever bullshit. There's a lot. They just like, that's a very, 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 very precise thing that they mean when they say, we don't know exactly how this works, as opposed to, somebody saying like, oh, well, we don't know what's going on in the FDA. Or we don't know what's this, and they pretend that it's like a whole separate thing of fantasy.
I guess maybe I'll steelman the layman, because I feel like I especially felt that way when I was in academia, but I feel like as I've like taken time and space away, especially like debated different academics, there are some academics, there are plenty of academics, and they're typically never online, because I find the most epistemically humble people tend not to congregate on social media.
Don't blame them.
Unsurprisingly, right? So there are so many scientists that are brilliant, but a lot of kind of like the loudest and proudest, including loud and proud, very good scientists, like people who are very informed, will sometimes get this way of engaging with people of being like, you're stupid and wrong, you don't understand anything about science, which is probably kind of correct. They probably are stupid, wrong, and don't understand anything about science, but they'll engage with you in a way of being like in a dogmatic way of essentially like resistant to considering anything else. And I think about like when you get into dogmatic areas in science where when somebody, I brought this up before, I'll use a different example. In neuroscience, there was this really big discovery that was made because a guy took an axon of I think a giant squid, because they're really big, so you can like look at them and study them, and he wanted to study it to try to understand action potentials and habituation and stuff like that. And everyone was like, don't do that, that's stupid, that's a terrible design, don't do this. Like, he was kind of going up against a bunch of neuroscientific dogma, and he kind of pursued despite, right? And there is tons and tons of instances in science where essentially people become dogmatic and resistant. You see this even with epigenetics wave. Epigenetics was kind of getting grown and grown and grown in the 60s. It was really, really dogmatically pushed down by like the more staunch geneticists until finally it was like, there was so much evidence, it was like undeniable.
Yeah.
Right? And so like, I guess to Steelman, I guess basically what I'm saying is I agree that in general, academics and scientists can be really good about this, but they are also people and can be really, really bad about this and get this kind of like elitist ivory tower. Like, we're just right and you're just like the silly people in the mud. Like, clean the mud out of your eyes, you dumb pleb. You have no idea what you're talking about, which I think is obviously harmful, just to Steelman.
Completely. No, and honestly, that's a really important thing to bring up in this conversation, because that's something that, pseudoscientists will bring up a lot of how, academia is an ivory tower and it's dogmatic and stuff like that. And to an extent, they're right. Like, there absolutely is that feeling. And even if us within the academic field are like, well, I've never experienced that and I don't think that and all that, like, if someone is telling that to you, it's because they feel that way. So whether you like it or not, there is some way that this, system is actually making people feel like that. And so it's really important. And that this, kind of going to what your point was earlier, Stephen, about if, my videos, if it's ever hard to like do the debunking side of things because I feel like it's not as effective, this is where that comes into play, where I'm like, the moment I start to like go after a person and kind of like punch down on them, people are going to stop listening. And that's really, really hard. So that's why with this, the 2-part video that you just started watching recently, I still do that, but I tried to make a very strong distinction at the beginning between, what I'm actually trying to communicate to this person as an individual and both of our caricatures, because everyone puts on a caricature. For us as, creators, it's when we're in front of the microphone or in front of the camera. For, a teacher, it may be when they're, online or in front of a classroom. But it's also really important to remind yourself that the person you're talking to on the other side, at the end of the day, is a person. And the moment, you take the saber out, they're done. They're not listening to you anymore. And so when doing content like that, I'm really trying to find the balance. I'm really in the middle of this process now. I haven't found, exactly how it works yet. But in this, I'm trying to find a way that, I can both debunk the things that someone is talking about and still be able to have my punchy self and all that, but also be able to like actually be like, hey, here's what we can do better. Like, here's the way that like, these are some of the fallacies that you've kind of like fallen into. Like, you're hurting yourself by not doing this research. Like, all the information I find is not from like some academic paywall, some ivory tower. Like, these are all sources that are linked right here. You could have found them as well, and you didn't. So like, do better. And like, I hate that. I hate do better because it feels like such a brush off. But like, that's I think a really important part of it is that like this is something that everyone has the ability to do. And we also need to make the space as open as possible so that people don't feel intimidated and scared away from it because it drives them right into the arms of pseudoscience.
I wish that there was more accountability from people that did the pseudoscientific stuff. It's harder because despite my aggressive personality online, I do feel bad when I'm like pressuring somebody a lot, and I can tell when somebody's getting really uncomfortable. But something I'm trying to do more is like, if you're going to be out here and you're going to claim that you've got some crazy answer in a field and you've got an audience and a following and you're leading people down a certain hallway, I think it's fair for people to start asking like, okay, well, when you say that you've read about this, read what? Which authors, like which studies, like talk about this. Like, I think you need to show, because I genuinely believe that the vast majority of not listeners, but content creators in the space read almost nothing, like Twitter headlines, not even news articles, which by the way, today an article is written to be read in about 3 to 4 minutes. Okay?
Yeah, that's true.
They're like
it was just
4
read time
paragraphs
at the top.
Yeah, it's insane. And people don't even read that. And it's very frustrating that there are so many of these sayings like, oh, do your own research. And it's like, that would actually be really great, but you don't. The people you listen to don't. Yep. You don't do any of your own research. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, people, going back to what we said before, one of the most insane things, I've only done this a couple times because it feels really bad, but if I have a guy who's willing to like be patient and I'm like, you know what, you think this thing about, we did this a few times during the vaccine arc, you think this thing about the vaccines, can you show me, like, how would you find out if the FDA study this? Like, can you share a screen? Just like walk me through how you would search for that. And that whole process was just so fascinating. I think he went to like Google and he's like, hold on. Then he goes to DuckDuckGo and I'm like, oh, why change search engines? He's like, I don't trust anything off of Google. And I'm like, okay. And then he goes to DuckDuckGo and he starts reading. He's like, okay, well, I don't know if I trust like the .gov sites or the FDA. And I'm like, okay. And then he goes over a few and he's like, okay. Then he clicks this and he clicks and he's like, okay, well, I guess this one kind of agrees with you. And then he goes back and I'm like, what do you think you just read? Like, what are you even reading? Like, a lot of people don't know a lot of the time what they're actually reading. Like, what's the difference between, I don't know, have you ever gotten into a debate with somebody where they'll give you like, here's 5 sources and it's 5 different news articles, but all of them are about the same date because they're all referencing the same study that was just published.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Like, this is one source. It's one study that I'm guessing you haven't even read. Or I'll have somebody, I got into a debate with a guy over, it was Israeli-Palestinian stuff. And he was like, how do I know that, these people believe whatever in Israel? And Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense, sometimes they tweet out their statements and then I link them. So, okay, well, here's what he said about this. And the guy's like, your source is Twitter? And I'm like, what do you mean by what? Or like if I link an article, like, oh, your source is CNN, and it's like, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Like, is my source Nature or the no? It's like a study. What do you mean?
It's
like,
the guy that said the thing on this platform.
Yeah.
And that's a great point. And that, again, that goes to that whole generalization thing where it's like, if you can really convince a group of people that everything on Google or everything from the CDC is just bad, then they're not going to listen to it. Like that whole thing of, do your own research. I'm sure all of us have lost track of the amount of times we have heard that. Like, and it is just ridiculous. Like, it's a cliche at this point of how much I hear these people like, well, if you do your own research, you'll find this. And it's like, what research? I did my own research and I found that you are wrong.
Yeah, it's the guy being like, I'm honest, trust me.
Yeah, like, literally. I'm like, I do not trust you. If you have to convince me that you're honest, you are not honest, And it's like, I also did my research. Here is what I found proving that what you're saying is wrong. So if you really did do your research, you either A, somehow missed all of this, which I doubt, or B, it is academic dishonesty because you ignored all of this. Whether they ignored it because it doesn't support them or because they genuinely don't trust it is anyone's guess. But like, that's just not how that works. So you're not doing your own research. You're cherry picking whatever you can find in order to support whatever your pre-existing bias is.
Yeah.
What I'm super curious, Destiny. What do you think that accountability should look like for, I guess, misinformation actors, but also importantly disinformation actors, because we kind of differentiated those two things.
Death.
Okay, death. We're not for the
Your punishment is death.
Not for the death penalty, except for
being wrong.
Disinfo Twitter, Twitter posters.
Disinfo Twitter, punishable by death.
It's not a platform thing. It's a culture thing. The culture has to change. There needs to be more accountability mechanisms for people's media sources. Like the thing is that people can be wrong about so much and it never, ever, ever, ever comes back to bite them.
Yep.
Like somebody will
in some spaces.
Yeah, or whatever is your political mind has destroyed you on. Like people will quote, my God, I have heard so many times, this is all in the political world, but like how many times like Fauci lied about masks or Hillary Clinton called Trump an illegitimate president. And it's like, why does it only take a single statement that you'll hold on to for 8 years to impeach these people? But then when Donald Trump says like, I know you'll be marching peacefully to the Capitol, why does one statement save him? Like there's a million different statements between all these people. Like, you're really going to hang everything. You're going to hang your hat off of one thing that this person genuinely might have gotten wrong, but you're going to ignore the 50 million other things that are incorrect here. Like, where's your track record? Like, Jesus.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And there's like, I mean, a level of cognitive dissonance, whether it's like, conscious or not, of, you have to ignore, you have to be aware that the thing you are saying is, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. I don't have words for it. Like, and I think really that,
it is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And that's, I think that really my confusion here, I think really sums it up, is like, it is just so genuinely hard to like argue with, because when you are in a debate platform, when you are in like in a mentality of debunking or fact checking and things like that, you are looking for logic and reason. And many of these arguments and the way they are structured defy logic and reason. It's almost impossible to bring a science mind to the table because these arguments are not hinged on science or grounded in reality. They are literally just opinions.
Well, it's actually losing, right? Because the moment you have to go like, okay, well, you need to understand that there aren't periods in Antarctica because of blah, blah, blah. You say this a lot, but you're already engaging in their landscape and context, right? And the problem is, it seems like, especially right now, we're in like this aggressively post-truth world with social media where it feels like a lot of times like it just doesn't matter what
like
is true.
There are people in my we call them orbit. I don't know how much, but there are people in my orbit. There are other content creators and everybody else. Yeah, where like I'll watch them. I was watching Pisco like arguing with Sean over stuff on Twitter, and I'm like, I'm mad that Pisco's you shouldn't even have. This is not a real argument. We're not having a real. This is not real. Nobody believes this. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I don't even think it should be argued. My brain is like lives in January 6th right now, but it's like it has to do with with Sean actually. It had to do with New York stuff.
Fitzgerald?
And it was like yes, and it had to do with like a single statement that he had said that like that Alvin Bragg had made in New York about promising to go after Donald Trump. It was one single statement, and that proved that it was like a political prosecution. And it's like, this guy's running for district attorney. Why would he not talk about prosecuting ongoing cases? And eventually, not only did we find out that he didn't make that quote, he said, okay, it was Letitia James that made that, but it wasn't actually her. She didn't even make that quote. And then he starts linking videos of her on her night after she won the election. And so it wasn't even what she ran on, arguably. And it's just like wrong after wrong after wrong. And it's like, bro, you're just like hunting for clips. And some of the information that you cited is the exact opposite. Like he said, two attorneys quit Alvin Bragg's office because they thought that Alvin Bragg was being too politically partisan and wouldn't go after, and was going after Trump too much. But when you read the story, they actually quit because Alvin Bragg said he didn't want to bring an indictment in front of a grand jury because he didn't think there was enough evidence to go after Trump for it. So it was the exact opposite. So it's like you knew some pieces of information, but you were presenting them completely incorrectly. And just the conversations are like, if I switched any of the names here, it would be so different.
Completely.
It would be so different.
And this is, kind of
like
what you were...
The Walls, stolen valor stuff, Donald Trump is literally a draft dodger. I know you don't care about this. You don't care about this.
No, I mean, like, I'm definitely not as, like, in the political sphere, but I mean, that's kind of how I found your content originally was, being in the kind of the political space, especially over COVID. I mean, like, that was it's all been a very tumultuous time pretty much since, 2016 and, even before a little bit. But, like, I remember especially over COVID, it was at a fervid pitch. And like, the issue I think about the whole archaeology discussion now is that archaeology has been used in the past as something for political gain. It's something that's, people will always find ways to make any type of science into politics. Absolutely. It shouldn't be. I don't think that's a controversial take, that this is not something that should be political. It is so politicized now. It is ridiculous. And I'm not going to get too much into it because I'm not, a political science person. That's just not really, what I do. But like, there is so much of this politicization around it, especially within the, pseudo-archaeology field. And I stumble into that so much with the, pseudoscience pipeline. Again, I talked about this at Virginia Tech, where like this is, pseudo-archaeology is one thing, pseudoscience is another. And like, I try and tackle and, debate those concepts, but all of it is a pipeline that leads into conspiracy. And if you believe in one conspiracy, chances are you're going to believe in a lot more. And it's really not long when you start going down these rabbit holes that like, it's like, oh, the pyramids were built by aliens. And then like, oh, someone's covering it up. They're covering it up. The globalists. And then you start seeing, like the echo parentheses and stuff like that. And it's like, holy shit, like how did we get here? And like, granted, and like very important to like, clarify this is like, not everyone who falls into this camp is someone who's going to be, using like anti-Semitic dog whistles and stuff like that. But the people who want to use anti-Semitic dog whistles will fall into this camp. Like, I think that it is safe to say that that is going to be the direction that they're going to go towards. And that's a really challenging thing to talk about that I don't go into too much because it's a very, sensitive subject. And I feel like I really want to make sure I'm well versed when I'm talking about it. But, when Ancient Apocalypse came out, there was all like, the accusations of, racism and things like that. And that's something which the moment you mention that towards this crowd, they're like, they called us racist. This is, the woke mob and they're, trying to silence us and cancel us and all that. And first, I have to, hold up the mirror and say that like, if I said something that I genuinely thought I was saying in good faith and someone was like, hey, that was racist, it might be a little bit hard to, take at first, but I'd be like, okay, like, did I actually say something racist? Because I don't want to say something racist, like I would actually think about that and take it to heart for a second and be like, wait, what can I do that I didn't know was racist and can, make amends there? But the issue is that, by immediately going for that trigger of like, cancel culture and all that stuff, there's never a discussion to talk about how these theories can feed into a racist ideology. I don't think that everyone who peddles these theories is a racist. In fact, I don't think very many of them are, but racists will agree. They are theories that will back up a pre-existing racist ideology that individuals have. So no, I don't think that like Graham Hancock is making a theory that is, inherently racist. I'm sure there are people who will, debate me on that, or, I don't think, let me correct that. I don't think that Graham Hancock is racist. I'm sure there are people who will argue with me on that, debate me on that, but the theory of Atlantis and things like that have roots in racist theory. And they are things that people will use who are already racist to back up their theories. And that's a very important thing to look at, because if you're saying something, and I trust that they're saying it in good faith, but you have people who are racist who are using what you are saying to back up their pre-existing racist ideologies, you have a responsibility to be more responsible about the things you're saying to make sure that that isn't happening if you genuinely care about it.
I'm super curious what you guys think about, and I know this is a bit of a deviation away, but I think about like the cancel culture, like woke mob stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think about Gamergate in 2016, which actually I was a normie for, so I've kind of mostly retroactively gotten to look at it, because there really was this proliferation of kind of like, I would say like kind of leftist craziness that was occurring for a long time, particularly culturally, like socioculturally, where there was getting a point where it's like everything under the sun is right. Like everyone was called a racist. It was just like the bludgeon. I know you fought with a lot of leftists for a long time about this. So like, to what degree is what's occurring now amongst the right, like kind of this harsh reactionary to that? Or like, do you guys see these two things as being related?
I mean, it's tough. I think really the challenging thing is like nothing means anything anymore. Like, the thing that they're saying is cancel culture and, like being silenced is, someone saying, hey, I fact checked what you said and it's wrong. Like, the racism thing is honestly a tiny sliver of that pie chart. I just bring it up because I think it's a pretty pervasive example. But like, we're just talking about, pyramids in Antarctica here, where it's like, if someone did research on that and was like, hey, that's wrong, people will jump to the whole like, well, you're silencing me. And it's like, what? Like, that's just not even what the point of this is. Like, are you hearing the words that are coming out of my mouth? It's tough. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, I agree with what you said, that nothing means anything anymore. I also think everybody will use whatever tool is available to them. Like people will decry, some tactic. Tim Pool talks about freedom of speech, and now he's saying he wants to sue the Kamala Harris campaign because they just used a clip of his. Like people,
beautiful.
Yeah, people always use whatever tool is available to them and convenient to them, and it's frustrating because like, a well-intended person on the left will be saying, like, to a person on the right, I think that person is racist. And then this person will come back over the top, and you'll try to argue with the person on the left. Be like, okay, hold on, I don't think this guy's racist against, these people. I think there's something else going on. And then this guy will come back and go, oh, this guy's like actually a postmodern neo-Marxist crazy person. And then they're like, well, look at what he's saying now. And it's like, okay, yeah, now he is being a moron, but it's because you triggered him, but he's not. This isn't. And it's like,
but
it's
also
impossible.
like just because he triggered, you shouldn't be a moron.
It's just so it's so unhinged.
There is no chicken and egg, obviously.
No.
I guess like part of this problem is probably that the internet is like this new medium, and so really kind of the game just has changed since the internet came around, and it's just like ramping up. But I am curious. And it could just be age bias of 2016 is around the time when I was probably starting to pay closer attention to social media, particularly because I was like sheltered until like 2014 or so, which is much older than most people are getting into social culture stuff, obviously. So I'm wondering, maybe I just have a bias of like seeing kind of the rise of like kind of the like cringy SJW stuff where you're like, I hate that SJW is now associated with like the cringy stuff, because I actually agree with a lot of like their issues, but also they've been like really gross with how they've like bludgeoned people with pretty morally loaded words. And now we're seeing this kind of like right-wing snap reactionary movement where I'm like, there were studies coming out that the more you deplatform these people, they go to Gab and then they just get more extreme over there. To what extent have like we created the problem, or is it there no chicken and egg in that? Like if 16 happened of the left wing kind of reactionary movement, because before then there was some pretty intense right wing, and I'm just not aware of it because I wasn't socioculturally involved back then.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've thought about that a little bit as well. In 2016, I was partway through high school. I was 16 at the time, and honestly, a lot of my lived experience in 2016 is why much of my interest in archaeology has manifested as debunking content. Because when I was 16, I was fully on the alt-right pipeline. It was early stages, but I was absolutely in it. Everyone that I was watching was all just talking about, the SJWs, and, it was you'd watch one person who has some bad take, of someone who's, talking about how kill all men. And it's okay, well, obviously that person doesn't represent everyone, but, then they're starting to talk about how all the feminists are out to get you, and how this is against men, and they don't want you to, and then before you know it, you're in these you're getting dog whistle preloads, before your balls dropped. And so that's something that was, pretty frightening for me. And thankfully I had some really patient and, kind friends in my high school who were able to kind of be hey, Milo, this is, maybe think about that for a second. And they kind of were very patient and kind of talked me through it, and were able to fully get me off it. I mean, look at who I am now, And so I think that's really why I try and do what I do, because I know how impactful it is for people to have an opinion like that challenged. Because if it runs unchallenged, it's really easy to be angry. And I'm sure someone could, argue, well, Milo, you're angry about the pseudo-archaeologists. And yeah, maybe I am. But I think it's a little bit different, where, I'm not really trying to change the mind of the people whose videos I'm talking about. I'm trying to let everyone who sees those videos have the tools that they need to not fall into the trap for themselves. It does not matter to me if, Ancient Apocalypse, if any of the people on there change their mind. It doesn't matter to me if, any of the TikToks that I, respond to change the minds of the people who made them in the first place. It's as long as that video gains more traction and more people see it and are able to have the tools for themselves to not fall into it. Because ironically, we're actually falling into the exact same trap. That's really the problem with this, is we're not even talking about archaeology anymore. The last of it has just been politics and psychology and the way that, radicalization works and stuff. And I can talk about that stuff day and night, but really it's kind of just, empirical evidence. I'm just talking about, what my experience is with it and stuff like that. And, by doing that, we do that thing that you were talking about, where it's you just fell right into the tar pit, where it's we're not talking about what nothing means anything anymore. We're all just, talking about, how you think and why you think and what this word means and that word means. And it's no, this boils down to what is fact and what is fiction. And that is it. If you want to turn that into politics, you can. If we want to take that down a political route, we can. But it is so frustrating that the simple idea of something that is true and something that is false has been turned into what it has.
I think we should just branch off the societies and let them all live in their own society.
Tribalism.
When I see people say I don't trust the FDA, blah, blah. Okay, well, stop taking your insulin. Don't take any more ibuprofen. Cancel your grandma's cancer treatments. Okay. Because if you don't believe in it, why would you believe in it? Yeah. It's so stupid.
Yep. There goes your healthcare.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I feel like there is a big issue, a fundamental misunderstanding that humans are naturally these truth-seeking machines. You mentioned earlier that it feels a little gatekeepy for science. That you have to teach somebody how to do science, and it feels gatekeepy to say that. But the reality is we have a lot of cognitive pitfalls that a lot of people just aren't aware of. And I think going onto the internet and assuming that you could just put a human being in the middle of all this information, they're going to absorb and be able to discern what's true from what's false, rather than what makes me feel good, is just absolutely not true. And we know this in every other part of society. Look at our engagement with food.
Yeah,
right? We didn't evolve to deal with ultra processed, calorie rich food everywhere, and then we have no way to deal with it. And the same is true for information as well, right? You don't have to confront a neighbor if you've got ideas that you guys disagree with a lot. You can just go onto the internet and find whatever group of people wants to reinforce whatever idea that you might have.
Exactly.
And because people aren't even aware that our minds have these types of limitations or these cognitive pitfalls, they don't even think to protect against it. And that's why you get people who will say things I'm confident of this because I get my news from a variety of resources, and their variety of resources are 3 different podcasts that don't do any homework or research themselves.
Exactly. It turns into a bit of the blind leading the blind scenario. And that's also really
No, it's the malicious leading the blind, because the content creators should know better.
That's a very good point. I think that's a good distinction to make. And that's also a really hard one to kind of, find the distinction of is, when someone is misinformed and when they are being consciously malicious. And it really varies from, person to person. But I mean, you definitely see it. I've come across more than a few people who I'm like, you can't believe these words that are coming out of your mouth, especially people who will intentionally rile up their audience or point them to send letters to the universities that archaeologists worked at. I mean, Flint had to deal with that. That's attack dog stuff. That is we are so beyond the realm of rationale that it blows my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just as a quick fun fact on all that, I don't know if this counts as paleontology or archaeology for dinosaurs, but you'd be surprised. I don't know if you've noticed this yet. You'd be surprised at the number of far right people that if you just ask them, what do you think about dinosaurs? You get there's a lot of people that don't believe in dinosaurs anymore. Did you know that?
Yeah. It's madness.
There's a whole petroleum conspiracy theory around how isn't it curious that once petroleum became popular, people started talking about dinosaurs more, and there's a reason why they try to and it's
wow, talk about chicken and egg.
I know.
Yeah, okay.
I remember the first time. So I grew up a fundamentalist Christian young earther, but I always believed in dinos. Okay.
Okay.
They're in the Bible.
Good. Yeah.
They're in the Bible.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But the first time I was ever exposed to a non-dino believer, just not a very good label. But she was we were talking about paleontology and dinosaurs. I think I was talking about dinosaurs and how I thought they were really interesting or whatever. And she's like, wait, you believe in dinosaurs? And I was like, wait, you don't believe in dinosaurs? And I was still actively a young earther at the time that she said this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
That was it was the most mind-blowing moment of being wait, what the, wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. And it was began this cycle of being I need to reanalyze my entire life.
That's crazy.
Am I part of the group that doesn't believe in dinosaurs? But yeah, it's super wild, how all these things kind of collect together. Specifically, the pseudo archaeology and the right-wing specific politics. I'm super curious. Is there as much pseudo archaeology on fringe left politics, or probably not so much? I'm guessing.
I'm sure there's a couple.
But it's more prominent on the right.
But my God, I could not point to an example. I mean that. I really do try and hold up that mirror, and I understand that I'll always have my biases, but when it comes to right-wing conspiracy ideology, it goes hand in hand with archaeology. And I think it's, this kind of branched mentality of, the they, whether, whatever the implication of that is, that it's there is a big group who are in cahoots to keep you in the dark. And that's what it always comes down to is they reburied parts of Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe. What are they hiding there? We need to demand that they excavate it now. And it's that is how archaeology has always been conducted. These sites have been buried for thousands of years. When you open them to the public or to the air, they erode, they come apart. You have to rebury them in order to protect them so that you can wait for better, technology to arise in the future. I mean, a very small portion of Pompeii is a comparatively small portion of Pompeii is excavated. And the only reason they haven't dug up the rest of it is because we're just waiting for better technology to, arise in the future so that we can actually gain more information from those sites. And so but it's way too easy to look at that. And if your mind is primed to assume that everyone is out to get you, you're going to look at it as some big cover up to keep you in the dark when it isn't. This is just the way that this works, but people don't have the basis of knowledge to know how archaeology functions. And so, of course, they're primed to believe that this is some, big cover up. It's crazy. I'm almost what do you think they're hiding? What is big archaeology doing to
I think it's a projection of your own, how you view the world and how you would conduct things onto other people if you were the one in charge. Every scientific discipline gets hijacked for whatever stuff somebody's trying to pass off as actual fact instead of just political opinion. And I think that for historical stuff, there's huge narratives built around, who controlled what. Like a far left example, I don't know if it's called Afrocentrism, but I know that there are groups of people, but it's fringe. It's not as common as it is on the right for whatever reason. But there are people that will try to argue that, for instance, all of Egypt was all pure black African Americans. All of them were. And it's a fringe belief, but they argue this because then, now for modern day, they can claim that we came from Egypt and we built the pyramids and this was all our civilization and we get to take credit for this. And then on the flip side, other people, on the white side will argue, that we shouldn't pay, homage to black creators or inventors or whatever because all of this stuff was founded by Europeans. That's when I argue with that one striker or whatever over music, and he was saying like, oh, jazz is just a bastardization of the waltz, and actually all the great music was made by Europeans, and that's because you want to be able to claim like all of music for your own pure like white ancestry. What a debate. He opened with that argument.
Wow.
And my background is saxophone. I played, and I was like, oh my God, thank you, God.
That is a strong start. Jesus, what an opener.
I know.
But it's not, none of it is actually like a factual analysis. It's like, okay, yeah.
It's like to
tell me
build into
how
the
like the
super
Jews
narrative.
did this and blacks heard all this and go ahead. Yeah.
And that's
okay.
it. And that's really it. Is it's like, are you done?
Yeah.
Can we talk about something real now? Like, I mean, and that's really the thing about it is like there's a couple, creators, if you even want to call them that, in sort of the pseudo-archaeology space who will remain nameless for the sake of, not stirring the pot at all. But like people send me their stuff all the time. And it is, exactly that kind of stuff where it's like, they're hiding this from you. We need more excavations. And we need like this and that. And, there's a big cabal covering it. And I'm like, have fun with that. Like, I'm not even gonna, like, what do I say to you to get through your skull? Because I'm not going to. So it's like, you have your hissy fit. I'm going to teach archaeology. Because that's going to be the thing that actually is going to inform people. This
but now
isn't
that
doing
you're
anything.
growing, now you can be the subject of conspiracies.
Exactly.
And it's fun. The last tiff I had with Candace Owens, she's like, oh, like I think he gets paid by Israel, and it's like, dude, we can both publish all of our income sources. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how am I even supposed to counter this? That like somebody be like, oh yeah, I think he got paid by. How can I even disprove that?
Yeah,
like, what a crazy.
I've had people accuse me of like working for the Smithsonian. The one that really stands out to me is when I did the evil Smithsonian. Yeah, when I got 1 million subscribers on YouTube, I got my plaque and I got to destroy a giant skeleton. It was pretty exciting. My black robe is still in the mail. But and it is that whole mentality of just general distrust. When I did my piece talking about ancient apocalypse, there's one comment that really stood out to me. A lot of really positive comments. I really tried my best in that one to make it not be a cult of personality where I'm attacking the individual. It was more me really trying to analyze what he was saying. And a lot of people got that. There was a ton of people who were like, wow, I just watched this because, I was stoned on my couch and I wanted something to see and I didn't have any reason to doubt it. He's got a British accent, sounds believable. And they're like, and you actually like fact check this. I could look through your sources and, I see that you were actually telling the truth. And so for the most part, it was great. But I remember there's obviously a lot of comments that were pretty negative, as you can imagine. But there was one that really stood out to me. And I think it was as simple as, you are the one he warned us about. And I'm like, do you hear yourself? Like, do you hear yourself? This is not archaeology. This is like cult mentality. And like, that's really where it blends into like this whole idea of, far gone ideology where like it ends up becoming like a cult. It's crazy.
The last guy that I debated 2 days ago on stuff relating to the election, it was like, yeah, I can tell. Like I'm listening to people like you, and you seem super reasonable all the time. Like you say so many reasonable, really logical things, but as soon as you talk about Donald Trump, you become unhinged. And I'm like, do you think that maybe that might be your problem? And like think about what you just said. And he was like, well, yeah, well, I can definitely tell that there's like a cult of people that don't like Donald Trump. And it's like, I have a shotgun on the wall behind me. You have 2 golden Donald Trump shoes behind you. Like, who's in the cult right now? Like, what the are you talking about? Like look at what is in your frame. It's like insane. There's a general distrust sometimes. No, I don't like that phrase. I understand what you're saying. I don't know why you say it. I wish it was, or if it was a general distrust, I could be a little bit more forgiving. Like somebody who's like an ultimate skeptic, I could be more forgiving. It's the fact that it's so general, that it's so specific and selective in how it's applied. Mm-hmm. Like people will tell you about, how much they don't trust a lot of the large institutions and the systems, and, everything is rigged against them. But if you really look at it, Elon Musk is who George Soros was supposed to be, right? He's a foreigner who bought a publicly traded social media platform. He took it private by using foreign money to purchase it, and now there's no transparency into it, and he posts all of his far-right public opinions on the platform in a way that no other large social media... Like, that's everything that you said George Soros would do, that he hasn't done, by the way. Yeah. And now Elon Musk is doing it. Why don't you care at all, right? Like, how much have you seen people on the right talk about Elon Musk's Neuralink thing? Like, a little bit, but not much. Can you imagine if Bill Gates had a Neuralink thing? Bro, you hear about it every day. Yeah, holy shit.
God damn.
Yeah, I always think like I can't remember who said it, but if the person who is ideologically opposed to you, when you describe them, if they're both a dumbass and a superpowered villain, you probably have a really bad understanding of them, right? Like,
oh, this is like a fascism thing. It's where like, yeah, these people are weak and stupid and horrible, but also they're like
also
threatening to
evil
overtake
and-
all
yeah,
of
yeah,
society,
yeah.
and we're on the verge of losing the war to them. And it's like, well, what is it, right?
Yeah. It's like-
Because like half the time, like we're talking about like Jews, like the way you explain to me, I think I want these people as my leaders. If they truly are controlling every facet of reality, and they have for like thousands of years, I think I want to be on their team. Then rule over me, like
It's been a
just so
general
stupid.
uphill for the last little bit, you know. Like we got our dips, but like they seem to be doing a good job, I guess. Oh man.
I'm super curious when you get into kind of this debunking stuff, what has been some of your more enjoyable things to debunk?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like, you know, and I'm glad we're kind of heading in this direction because, you know, it is it's intense to kind of talk about the psychology of all of it. But at the end of the day, the debunking content is really fun. It is really, really, really fun. And I think that, you know, really it really varies from topic to topic. So every video that I do is kind of something different. So depending on what it is that they're talking about in the video, but really the things that I like to debunk the most are things that actually have some foundation in reality, like something that is more someone extrapolating or misinterpreting
Like
actual evidence, like pyramids in Antarctica. You know, like when people talk about, you know, like giant skeletons or Nephilim or the archaeological cabal, it's like, are you done yet? Like, cool, thank you. Now you want to give me like something, because like, you know, with the pyramids in Antarctica that we, like, I'm really glad we picked this image. You know, that's based on an image of a mountain in, you know, Antarctica where the snow has blown up the side of it, and it like kind of looks like it has like two sloped sides, and so people are like, oh, it's a pyramid buried in the snow. And like this is like really at the very early, like the very low end of something where I can actually like debunk it. And it's like, no, the reason it looks like that is because it is a mountain. It is in a continent that's covered in ice. I can apply my knowledge of environmental science to tell you how a mountain like that is shaped. It's the same structure that the Matterhorn is, where you see that like very iconic, almost pyramidal top, but this one is mostly buried. So glaciers have a process of sort of really like sloping mountains. And so because this is a mountain covered in, or a continent covered in ice, that's how this mountain was created. So I can like give a little bit of actual like rationale to explain why it looks like that, because the whole conspiracy is just based on it looks like, and then extrapolating the rest. So I really like doing things like that, where like I can actually, like they actually make points that I can look at critically and assess whether or not they're true.
And educate too.
And educate, exactly. Like it gives people a little bit of extra information that they can use in the future.
The looks like thing is so hard. Not to suck it too much into a political realm. 9/11.
Oh, Jesus.
But unironically, 9/11, yeah, it's so funny when people will look at, I mean, I'm sure people will look at like the snow blowing off the mountains, or for 9/11, it was, is it Building 7, I think, coming down? It's so funny because one logical pitfall that people will fall into is people will see a thing and it will look like pretty peculiar, and you never take a step back and like, hold on, how peculiar is this particular thing? Or like, do you even have a standard of comparison for this thing? Like when you say you could apply this to literally any stat, any number, somebody will say something like,
Trump
can
is
you
gonna
believe that
10% embargo,
or even something even less malicious, like this guy hit his sister, 14 times growing up. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that. When you say hit, like when they were 3, what is the average number of times somebody hits like a sibling? I don't know. Like, and I don't have that information. I don't even know how the fuck I'm supposed to feel about this particular thing. And people will say things like with all seriousness, will be like, I watched the towers. I saw that building collapse. There's no way that a fire alone could bring down a building like that. It's like, how the would you know? How many times have you seen a building of this size?
Hit by a plane.
Yeah, next to 2 other buildings that got hit by like commercial airliners, and then the whole, like, what is your point of comparison here to be so confidently telling me?
I've seen this happen a lot. So
yeah. Or like the way that the mountain blows up and stuff, like there's no way that could form the way. Really?
Yeah.
How many mountains have you seen snow blow off of before? Like what the f are you even comparing this to? Like it just seems like it wouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
Like, because there's a lot of, it's, and I wish I could find a snappier way to do it, but it's like you go outside and there's a pothole and there's a puddle in it, and it's like, what's the chance that the puddle would be the exact same shape as the pothole that it's in? And it's like, there's probably a really good chance, actually. It's probably the only way that it could be. Like, it's so frustrating. Yeah.
It is. It's really frustrating. The one that always gets me, and I talk about this a lot because it's just like, it's low-hanging fruit, is the giant footprints. I mean, it's everywhere of people, like there's this one image, and we'll, throw it up for the YouTube version of this, but it's like a guy standing next to this this giant footprint in South Africa. It's, you know, as big as he is, and it's in like a granite wall like next to him, and it looks like a footprint, and that's it. That's it. And I'm like, where is like the critical thinking here? Like, why is it on a wall upright like
I was
this?
just about to say, wait, like he was like
in
walking.
granite too, which
It's like
is
a
like
Spider-Man giant.
yeah, exactly. And he just like, you know, climbing up there, and then no more footprints after
Yeah, just
that.
one?
And also like, yeah, just one.
Well,
that
he was
it.
thinking about going up, and then he was like, oh, fuck,
shit.
my like crazy ex is up there, and it's like, I
hate her, I can't stand her. And then, you know, it's also like, you know, this is in like granite. The last time this would have been like pliable, it was like magma, and then it had to be like, you know, crushed and like moved, and it's like just.
It's got hot feet.
Yeah, I'm like, and it was underground. Like granite, it doesn't just form from like erupting from a volcano. Like it cools and it morphs and it compresses and then it comes to the surface. And I'm like, where is the critical thinking in that? So there is something really fun about that because, like, you know, at the risk of sounding really pretentious, like you can kind of run circles around that shit. Where it's like, if someone does just come to you with something that is genuinely just based on it looks like, you know, I don't remember which razor it is, but, you know, like extraordinary or claims made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. It's
Occam's.
like, yeah, it's like, okay, then great. If you think it looks like a footprint and it is a footprint, I tell you it's not a footprint. Like, I'm not going to argue with you on that, you know?
And in a million different pictures of things, like I'm sure you could probably find a lot of really weird things just by virtue of how many things there are. There are a lot of things.
There's a lot of
There's
things.
a lot of things.
There's a lot of things.
You can find a lot of things that look weird and are weird.
Ghost
and there are
photos. Like I don't do any like paranormal stuff because it's just not what I do, and it's not in the scientific realm. If there is paranormal stuff, we haven't found a way to quantify it, and so I'm not gonna, you know, talk about that. But like, you know, ghost photos and stuff where it's like there's a little light in this picture, and it's like awesome. Or there's a lot of pictures.
Yeah. There's a guy that does, I don't know his name, but he did a video on, I think it was a JFK shooting, and he takes like a 5-minute thing to explain, broadly about like, I guess like misinformation. And he goes on to say, like, let's say that there's a bank robbery and the guy gets away, but it seems like in order to have gotten away, he would have had to have gone pretty fast. But like every other fact like seems to sell the story. You can't dismiss an entire thing just because something is unlikely. And people will do that. People will find it like, well, what are the chances of this happening? It's like, they could be pretty low. So what?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't mean it's impossible. And if every other fact is pointing that direction, you can't take one or two things that are improbable. Like, improbable things do happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if you...
Careful, they're going to take that statement and be like, improbable things do happen.
Improbable things do
Pyramids in
happen. Yeah,
Antarctica.
people, I firmly believe that people have three numbers in their mind when it comes to stats. It's 0%, 50%, and 100%. There's nothing... like,
good.
A 90% thing can never fail for a person, and a 15% thing can never happen. And yeah, people just have a really bad time, again, because we're used to seeing patterns, and that's what we kind of look for, I think, as people, and we'll create patterns if there are none. I think.
Yeah. And that's why we get the whole "it looks like" thing, is because that's the way our brains work. Like, everything that's going on here, this is all very new. We're not supposed to be doing this. Like, we are supposed to be, you know, sitting on a beach eating mangoes. Like, this is out of the realm and scope of what a human brain is supposed to be processing. So because we have our, you know, hardwired brain, without getting into like the evopsych thing, which is its own can of worms, you know, like our brain is wired to see patterns. It's a survival, you know, instinct. It's a survival behavior. And so we see things everywhere. Like, the amount of times I've walked down the street and been like, oh, that building kind of looks like a face. Like, no shit. We're programmed to see human faces. That's what we recognize, you know? Like, that's the most important thing you see is another person's face. So it's like, oh, you see a face in the cloud or a footprint on the stone. And it's like, of course you see that. They're reference points for you, you know?
In fact, you have like parts of your brain dedicated just to facial recognition.
Yeah.
And nothing. There's no part of your brain that's dedicated to just foliage recognition of leaves, right?
Yeah.
But there's a whole, like, the amygdala just responds to eyes like crazy.
Totally.
Regardless of the orientation. One thing that I was thinking about of like these little, like, there's these little facts that experts and people knowledgeable in a field take for granted a lot of times because it's such common knowledge that people don't know. For example, the reason that excavation sites get reburied and the reason why they don't just excavate all of Pompeii, I actually had no idea until talking to Flint today. I had no idea. I've never questioned it because I'm decently trusting in institutions of being like, I assume experts are smarter than me and have a good reason for things, typically. But it's interesting of being like, I wonder how many people could have been inoculated from a whole bunch of beliefs if they just understood, oh, well, you have to rebury it. You have to protect it for future technology. As soon as I hear that, I'm like, oh, I never thought of that. But also, obviously, right? And there's all these like little tiny things that I remember the first time I learned about like patternicity of the brain, right? And that's like, oh, patternicity of the brain literally explains like all of our thinking errors and the development of science. Like it's oh, okay, all this shit suddenly makes sense. But it's something that like you
Yes.
take for granted
Yes.
when you're an expert in this field, which is why I talk so much about like, I think so much about how important that the knowing how to understand the field is important, because there's these little things that you're going to just pick up even if you don't put language to when you're getting educated or mentored by an expert in something that you just can't really get access to. I've never read anywhere, although I'm sure it's somewhere. I've never heard somebody say we rebury because of X, right? And I watch like documentaries.
Yeah.
I watch a lot of archaeology documentaries and stuff. Not that that makes me an expert on anything, but right? It's like, oh, I've never been exposed to this idea.
And I'm glad you bring that up, because that's really the crux of it. Is what you're talking about is science communication. That's why like that is the leading thing. Like I don't even have like debunker in my bio. At least I don't think I do. I may still in some, but like I don't lead with that. Like that is not one of the things I do. I'm an environmental scientist, I'm an archaeologist, and I'm a science communicator. Science communicator, honestly, before all of those, because that is the most important thing, is being able to give people the tools they need to understand these things. And that's really like my frustration with science and the scientific world, is that maybe to no fault of science, maybe it's the fault of the system that we've kind of created, but science is locked behind a paywall. If you want to go to college, you have to have the money to go to college, which creates a bottleneck so that you have to be wealthy in order to be highly educated, which is absolute bullshit. So like if you create a system where you have something that restricts people from being able to achieve higher education, we have no one to blame but ourselves when people aren't educated enough to recognize these things for themselves. Like that's why I've really tried to, dial back how punchy I am, because like it's not going to do any good to like, bully someone who just wasn't educated in this. They don't have the tools to like, compete in the same level. And like, I really am trying my best to not say that in a way that sounds really pretentious. It's like science and academia has an obligation to like connect with the public. They have an obligation to reach out to people and make them feel welcome in the space so that other people, regardless of how much money they have, regardless of if they've gone to college, can have the tools and the same understanding that they do. Like that's, like I talked about that again in my Virginia Tech Talk, and it's something else I'm going to be doing at my upcoming lecture at the University of Maine, where it's like, I love what all of my professors taught me. It's wonderful to go to a classroom and sit there, but at the end of the day, on that whole semester, you and 50 other kids have learned what happened in that classroom, and you go home and you'll tell your friends, and maybe you'll get a PhD and you'll become a professor too someday, and that's great. I teach classrooms of millions of people. Like that is education. That is science communication. That is why what I do is so important. And it's like, that is why I'm really trying to bring more people into the fold, and why I'm so excited to see people like Flint who are like, beyond academic, prowess coming into the field, because like, this is how you teach people. We still have to have universities. We still have to have classes. And I understand that there's going to be financial incentives always, but like, we need to move past the classroom and make these things available for everyone.
I think another really tricky thing about like dissemination and science communication that I've been thinking about a lot is that even though I actually value it, that essentially a bachelor's is required for basically and most entry jobs that pay decently well. But there's pros and cons of that. Pro is that you have a more educated populace. Con is that the reality is that because you're en masse educating people in a university setting, when university wasn't originally really set up for that style of education, the problem is that the value of a bachelor somewhat erodes, and therefore you have situations where not all bachelor's degrees are the same. Somebody who gets an A+ in every one of their classes and does like an undergrad thesis and stuff like that, they might only have a bachelor's, but that's a very, very different type of thinker and like knowledge, like a soft expert on whatever their major is in. Than somebody who got like C's all the way through. They're like, man, fuck it. I don't care. I'm here to get my degree. I don't care about any of this shit. So I can get a better job pay, which is super legitimate because you need these things, right? So it creates like this issue where I think a lot of people get increasingly disenfranchised with like the education institution. They're like, yeah, well, my sister-in-law has a bachelor's degree in psychology and she's dumb. And it's like, well, your sister-in-law might be dumb and might have gotten C's in psychology, but that doesn't mean that the education system or that bachelors are inherently dumb. It just means that like you have to be able to think past your heuristic of what you think a bachelor's is and learn how to evaluate who's a good thinker on these things and who's not. Yeah,
you shouldn't attribute something to the entire scientific system that can be attributed to an individual.
Right. Yeah, but it makes it really tricky. Like it sometimes frustrates me being like, I really want people to go and get like a secondary secondary education and whatnot. But I also kind of resent that the job force requires people to get secondary education that I know don't care about what they're learning, because now you've got a bunch of people with like a bachelor of biology or bachelor of psychology that never use it, spent a lot of money on it, and like probably don't really rep the field. And it like muddies down what the field even represents, which is unfortunate. But
maybe the issue for a lot of the education stuff is like in terms of teaching like actual like critical thinking, there's not much incentive to do it. It's probably not that helpful for a lot of people, and you can specialize and do decently in a job without having any curiosity or any good like foundation to build, critical thought. You don't really need any of those for most jobs. So if you don't need them for the job, and if you don't need to learn that in school, and if you don't have an interest in it, I think it's really hard to force that on people because there's so little reward for exercising that type of thought in society. And in a lot of ways, there's a lot of punishment. You can do so at your detriment. Like if you exist in a certain community that is, we'll say, like heavily religious, and you, for whatever reason, discover atheism, or it could be the other way around. Maybe you're in a community that's super atheist and you discover, religion. There might be a big punishment for you coming to a different idea, even if you're using some critical thought process. It's like, well, what the fuck is the incentive? Like there's no reward for it. And then especially when you look at people that exist in large spaces and disseminate information publicly, it's not done in a very critically accepted way.
Yeah.
And it's not very critical at all. And like these people, there is no critical, but like, where's the reward? There's no reward for it. There's no benefit. And there's a detriment for it, right? However many videos you take, if you did half the research, you could do 10 times as many videos.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So like, well, what the fuck is the point? You're losing money.
It is.
It's like, this has to be like a value judgment in your mind, and you're willing to take a hit to actually go through and adhere to some principle or some idea. But but most people won't. You would expect most people to do it. I think that's a problem. It's frustrating. It is.
It's very frustrating. And it's a challenge to, changing one's mind is a hard thing to do. That's something that I also really tried to do, especially with my Ancient Apocalypse piece, is try my best to set aside what my, implicit bias may be, to actually look at it as research. Because at the end of the day, I do genuinely think that, like, we talked about this a little bit earlier, where it's like things that are controversial can sometimes, when researched, end up being true. You were talking about that, I forget what he was dissecting. What was he dissecting?
A squid axiom.
A squid axiom. How could I not?
Not
axon.
axon.
A squid axle. So things like that. Like, an example that comes to mind for me is with the black mat layer that proves that an asteroid impact killed the dinosaurs. So before that was discovered, one of the prevailing theories was that there was a huge amount of volcanic activity in what's now Siberia.
I thought it was a flood.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
Oh, yeah. You're raising my blood pressure. And so there was a theory that it was a large amount of volcanic activity in what's now Siberia, and there's still some evidence to support that. I'm not really getting into that right now, but either way, it was found through extensive research from these two guys that there was a lot of evidence that it was an asteroid impact, and now that's like the widely accepted theory of what was the main thing that wiped out the dinosaurs. And I think it's really easy for pseudoscientists to cling to things like that because it's a time when that rogue scientist went against everyone. Everyone told him not to, and he was right in the end, and that's great.
That's me too.
Exactly, but this goes back to that whole thing of if you do the problem all the way through, are you getting 2 points on it or 8 points on it, even if you don't get the right answer at the end? Where it's like, if you were wrong pretty much from the start, it's not the same thing as being a scientist who's like, okay, I have a lot of evidence here, and just because you guys don't believe me, I'm gonna keep researching this because I'm and then they find evidence of it. If you were wrong at point one, keep going, but you're still going to be wrong at the end, you know?
Not only are those guys usually engaged in good epistemic practice and good, research practice, another thing, too, I think that's changed in our scientific environment is we know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff. And whereas, 200, 300 years ago, maybe it was possible for one man, standing on the shoulders of a couple other people to make huge strides in discoveries relating to electricity or, stuff or discoveries, inventions for light bulbs and stuff like that. It's a lot harder today for one guy to invent a new microprocessor. When you get into these really specialized fields, man, these papers sometimes will have, 50 authors, published in the et al section. These are a lot of people working on these projects. So it's harder to see this one genius that revolutionized, microprocessor architecture. It's like nobody even knows the names of the scientists that are working on this stuff now, but they're incredibly important. They're in every single device that we use. Leaning back on kind of what you said before, I feel like a lot of people just don't know how a thing works. And when you don't know the underlying stuff or you don't understand the process, it's very easy for the mind to insert a lot of conspiratorial nonsense, basically.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And I think that the other thing that's, worth noting on that is when there is, we'll use the dinosaur, the asteroid impact as an example again. That was obviously a huge discovery. That changed a lot. That being said, it didn't fundamentally change everything we know about everything. And that's also really important to note, is that a lot of the, inventions, yes, I totally agree. There's, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. And even with scientific discoveries, again, there are so many people in those papers and there's a lot of research that goes into making any of these discoveries. But it's very infrequent that a discovery is made that fundamentally changes everything about everything we know. And that's a really good way that you can kind of identify pseudoscience, because they claim that their discovery that only they have found changes literally everything.
Everything. There's a short story. I don't know if I call this a short story or an essay written by, do you know who Isaac Asimov is?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the one that he writes about how flat earthers aren't completely incorrect?
Oh, I don't think so. No.
It's a very good little short essay that builds on that idea, and that flat Earth, as opposed to the idea of a random crazy Earth or whatever, is actually very close to the idea of a round Earth. You're only off by I don't know what the degree is, but 1 degree of change that would cause the planet to be round. So the person that has thought that the entire Earth is flat has made a more intelligent judgment than the person who thinks it might just be completely
you're
random.
Extrapolating.
Exactly. And then from there, he's well, technically, if you think the world is a sphere, it's not. It's an oblate spheroid or whatever, because it bulges in the middle because of gravitational whatever. And he's so if you think the Earth is round, you're also wrong, but you're not as wrong as the guy who thinks it's flat, who's not as wrong as the guy who thinks it's random. And if you think it's an oblate spheroid, you're not as wrong as the guy that might know more. It kind of plays into that idea, or not plays into it, but it reminds me of the saying, every model is wrong, but they're all good approximations.
Yeah. It's just which one's closest.
Yeah. The idea of flipping an entire field on its head is almost never going to happen unless it's a very, very, very new field, maybe.
Yes.
And when somebody speaks about that, this changes everything, how did everybody miss it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is there will constantly be new discoveries, and especially in new fields. The big one, I talked about this in my recent video on the expanding Earth conspiracy, where when we discovered, plate tectonics, that's huge. That changes pretty much everything. But plate tectonics was based on continental drift, which was kind of close to plate tectonics. It's the whole thing about the Earth being flat. The guy who thinks it's flat is not quite as, is a little bit more wrong than the other guy. Mm-hmm. So we're refining it. It is again, diminishing returns as you go. There's going to be more and more. So let's say we discover some new field of science. The discoveries that are made in that in the early years of its existence are going to be huge. They're going to be,
which is why they're always so exciting too.
Totally.
New fields are, yeah.
But the claims made by a lot of pseudoarchaeology people is, we found that there is evidence that there is a whole civilization that covered the whole planet that we've somehow just missed. That is a massive claim, and outstanding claims require outstanding evidence, and there's not even outstanding evidence. There's not even evidence.
There's not any evidence. Yeah.
So we end up with this problem where it's not someone with, the asteroid where they're hey, we think we have evidence of this thing. We're going to kind of chase it down, and, they're what they discover changes something. It changes a factor of it. They're they're claiming that their discovery will change everything. Yeah. And that's a red flag. Watch out for that,
I think there's, in talking about it changes everything, I think there's few moments where you have paradigm shifts in a field, right?
Totally.
Quantum mechanics, epigenetics are the two easiest point twos. I don't actually know. I'd be super curious. I wonder if major paradigm shifts in established fields occur 10 to 15 years after a major new technology leap. For example, with human brain organoids, I suspect we're at the precipice of a pretty big paradigm shift, just because we can finally research human brains in a way that ethically we just never could, right? So there's a pretty good chance that we're going to start understanding the development of autism and really know what it is and looks like, because you just can't pull fetus brains out and put them in a vat, for obvious reasons, right? And I don't actually know, but I wonder, paradigm shifts do occur, but I think it's really important that people realize they occur Rarely. They truly are exceptional events, and they're in part exceptional because the entire field is going to fight them, because the burden of evidence, like if you watch and understand like the fight between Einstein and Bohr before quantum mechanics was even accepted as a plausibility, it was a huge, like decades-long battle because the burden of evidence for extraordinary claims is extraordinary. And those claims can sometimes come true, but the issue is when they do come true, they are major century-wide historical events in the field.
Not only that, but I think it's important too, because even the term paradigm shift, I think is a bit misleading because it makes people think that everything that we knew is totally wrong and now there's a whole new thing.
That's fair.
Usually the reason why these shifts are happening is because there are some problems that aren't solved or aren't working. Yeah. And then once they've viewed a thing a new way, like this paradigm shift has happened, there are other things that were unsolvable. Then I was like, oh shit. Like without knowing anything at all about archaeology, which I know nothing about, I'm sure that once that asteroid theory became more popular, I'm sure there were a ton of different people out there that were looking at different things like, oh shit, this thing makes more sense. Like I see why the temperature or whatever was there. That actually makes more sense now. Like that'll happen. There's very rarely, or probably never, is there a huge paradigm shift where it's like, not only is there a paradigm shift, man, I don't know all about anything that's happened. Burn all those papers. Ground the planes. They're not going to fly anymore. Like me, I guess, right?
That's
like that just doesn't really happen. And and the other thing that is worth noting is this kind of alt history crowd talk about it like archaeology is they're dogmatic and won't accept any changes, and it's like there are paradigm shifts in archaeology all the goddamn time, and they're paradigm shifts made by archaeologists.
And most of the pseudoscientists that are making claims are usually building off of at least a little bit some archaeologists claim themselves. Yeah, where's your original research?
You aren't doing any you're not digging, you're not researching, you're just taking other archaeologists' claims, misinterpreting them, and then adding your own bullshit on. So it's like, I mean, again, we're going back to it. It's the classic one, but like Göbekli Tepe, like it's the site that pushed back the idea of sedentism by like, thousands of years. It's
what country is that in?
It's in Turkey. It's in the Anatolia region. Yeah, southeastern Turkey. And then, Karahan Tepe, which is theorized as the oldest settlement on Earth. It's like 11,000, 12,000 years old. It's like crazy, crazy old.
Why are they called tepes? I'm so sorry.
It means hill.
Hill.
It means
hill.
Thank you. So Karahan Tepe is, or Göbekli Tepe is the Potbelly Hill, and I don't remember what Karahan is. But they like those discoveries were made by archaeologists who, when they found them, began excavating, dated the sites, figured out how old they were, published their studies, and now you get a bunch of grifters clinging onto them and trying to come up with their own bullshit. It's a beautiful irony. I'm like, do you guys not realize that the very people that you're like calling to have like, fired or, they're not doing enough and they're hiding shit. I'm like, you wouldn't exist without them.
Yeah,
they did all the research.
Show me your original work or show me anything you've done that's like made. So that's why I said earlier, we just need to have two separate societies. Because then, show me. I want to see what you invent on your own. You don't believe in the FDA. You don't believe in universities. You believe, okay, then show me what you can do. I want to see it. Yeah, let's see something. Yeah.
They get Texas or where they?
I don't know. Yeah, they go to Montana.
Have fun with your first, cholera outbreak.
Yeah, show me how that works. Show me how you get through that. Yeah. How do you know like what GitHub is, or do you program it all, or
barely?
Oh,
barely.
Yeah. It's just like this idea of like, there's like this huge line of collective wisdom that's passed down through like all of this different work, and then at some point you're going to branch off and say all of that is bullshit, and I figured it out. It's like, the fact that you can even make this statement
it's ridiculous.
Is a testament to what, like, you're talking about about like layers of the earth. How do you even know about that? Oh, because other people,
someone dug it. Yeah. I've been really into crosswords lately. I finally spent the money. I finally spent the money and got the New York Times puzzle app, and I have been loving the crosswords. And I feel like there's an analogy to be made there, where like I've been finding that where you get like you get your first pass, your second pass, and you're starting to get some things in place, and there's just this part that just doesn't work, and you're like, none of this makes sense. There's literally no word that has PXD next to each other, and then you're like, oh, one of these words is wrong, and the moment you figure out what that right word is, everything else falls into your place, and you're like, oh, well, there you go. Like, I didn't have to restart the puzzle. I didn't have to like throw it out and start from the top. It wasn't that everything was wrong. It's like, okay, sometimes you hit a dead end. Like, science works like that, where you're gonna like, it relies on getting things wrong so that you can know what's right. You won't know what's right unless you make some mistakes, And
it makes predictions. Make a fucking prediction.
Yes.
It doesn't work when we talked about this earlier, the all roads lead to Rome, where literally no matter what the outcome is, you're going to say your particular pet theory predicted that outcome. Like make an actual prediction, and let's see if there anything matches up here. We spent how much money building these massive particle colliders. Was the Higgs boson, was that theorized to exist in the 40s? Like these particles were things they didn't discover them brand new.
Yeah.
Like these were predicted to. They were part of the standard model, and they existed for a long time. We weren't able to see them, but they were predicted to have existed. Yeah.
And that's a really important point to make with this conversation about Göbekli Tepe too, where like the alt history pseudoscience people will cling to this idea of like when Göbekli Tepe was discovered, like it changed everything, and archaeologists were wrong. And it's like no one ever said that like this is how old any structure is and as old as it will ever get. We were always open to like, okay, well this is the oldest thing we've found. We're probably gonna find stuff older than that.
And even more than that, the question is, if they had no idea and everything, how the f did they even know to dig there? The Earth is a big place. There's a lot of places to go. The fact that you're even researching in that direction probably shows that there's like some inclination or some idea, unless it was discovered completely by accident. But like, it's ridiculous.
It is, and the other interesting thing I think about Göbekli Tepe is it dates to right around the beginning of or it predates when previous evidence suggested agriculture arose. And so that's been the really big thing is like they think it may push back the date of agriculture. Like there's domesticated wheat that, was found to have been like it branched off from a wild strain in like within 40 miles of where Göbekli Tepe is in like, within like a few hundred years of when Göbekli Tepe was built. And so, there's this whole idea that, within archaeology that complex society, with stone structures and things like that required agriculture in order to be able to like feed enough people to make those. So you didn't see a lot of that in hunter-gatherer societies. That's not saying it's impossible. That's just saying that we haven't seen a lot of it. And there is a pretty big increase in megalithic architecture once we figured out how to plant stuff in the ground, So, but no one is claiming that like it is impossible or that we're never going to find anything older or that there wasn't hunter-gatherer societies that did come together to build these things. And we just don't have the answers yet. And this is where the alt history crowd are sort of self-reading, where they're viewing it as being so black and white. They're like, well, it has to be either this or this. And it's like, no, we just don't really know yet. Like we are working on uncovering that. Every discovery is a new discovery. We're going to keep learning. It's not like, they throw the baby out with the bathwater where it's like, this thing changed a little bit of what you said. And so everything is wrong and I'm right. It's no.
There's also a bit of that perspective versus retrospective too. And I always look bad in these arguments. It's so frustrating where like somebody will predict, they'll say something, I bet that this thing is absolutely going to happen or whatever. And it's like, for what reason? You have no reason to even think that. And like, so you're saying it's possible? No, I mean, it could. I'm not sure. Maybe 50-50. I don't know. Like there's a chance that this particular event will happen in this way, but I'm not sure. And then eventually, if the event does happen, now people are like, looks like you were wrong. And I was like, I said it's possible. It's like, well, this guy knew 100%. No, he didn't. It just happened to happen.
Just happened.
Like, what the
Yeah, like this wasn't on a timer until he decided if it did or didn't.
Yeah,
like
Jesus.
You were gonna just let the clock run down until it happened.
Yeah.
Like what? My God, ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it's also really important for people to understand, right, when you're talking about that black and white thinking. I'll have a lot of people be like, yeah, but I came across this person who's an academic and they're being black and white about this thing. And I'm like, okay, that scientist is being ascientific in that moment. That's bad.
Yes.
That's bad and wrong, but also they're people. Of course. There are assholes in every group and sometimes they're scientists and right now they're you know, and that is just the way that it goes.
Also, why are you pretending to care about this guy just because he's a doctor and he has an opinion? Why not look at the field?
Yes, exactly. And that's really where it is, where they find the sacrificial lamb and they're like, well, this one guy did this thing. And like the amount of times I've seen some poor, like PhD student or scientist get roped into this bullshit where they said one thing and they're like, see, this guy said about the ice core samples that this, that, and the other thing. It's like, he didn't say that. You said that. He gave you like a few numbers and you ran with it to a completely different direction. And now this poor bastard has his name on your mess. And it's like, that's just not that's not the point, And every once in a while, like you said, you do come across a scientist who is, engaging in bad science. And that doesn't mean that science as a whole is a bad practice or inherently flawed. It just means you met someone who's just being kind of a dick. Like, there's kind of a dick everywhere. Well,
and also, a scientist is not science, right?
Exactly.
It's a whole process.
It's an individual, yes.
Yeah, it's like having one dude that lives on a planet claiming that, like, he is science, and he's, like, publishing peer-reviewed research, and it's like, who the is your peer? Are you DID or what?
He knows everything about archaeology, botany, medicine, psychology.
Jack of all trades.
I am the scientist.
I am the science, and it's like how? Like, what if you're going? it's self-defeating if you think about it for 2 seconds. Like, you're appealing to the authority of this guy, but the only reason we grant authority to scientists is because they exist as part of this broader apparatus. We wouldn't give them any authority if they all operated independently. They would just be people that know a lot of stuff. So how would you grant authority to a guy who's standing in opposition to the field when the only reason we give people in this field authority is because they stand with the field? It doesn't make any sense. You don't go to a hospital to get a new heart transplant done in any way that a surgeon imagines it. There's like a way that they learn it in school through the entire system.
All right, I'm gonna try a new method. Everyone check this out.
All right, Jim, I was thinking about sheep hearts. How do you feel about it?
Might work.
I had a random question. This might be out of scope, but I was obsessed like 2 years ago with Homo sapien evolution. And then as a result of being obsessed with it, my news feed that I had, the app at the time, I was constantly being fed like new Homo discoveries, essentially. Not gay discoveries, by the way.
I'm always being fed new Homo discoveries.
I love Homo discoveries.
The SJWs. Yeah.
Damn woke mob.
And one thing that I was thinking about is like we keep like pushing back the time. So like there was evidence that Homo sapiens developed tools at this era, and then like 2 years later or whatever, they're like, actually, we just found one that was like almost 75,000 years older than the old one, and it keeps going back. And I think what's really interesting is when I like talk to my more conspiracy inclined friends, I'll be like, see, they keep pushing the time back. And I'm like, they're never going back to a time where they're like, it's going more proto-scientific, more ancient, more like undeveloped, to suddenly there's an ancient civilization that's exceptionally developed with like planet cutting lasers and shit.
Yeah.
Like they're all like, we might be pushing back the timeline. There will eventually be a hard point where Homo sapiens develop, although that's not even a hard point because it's a gray line. Like,
it's so blurred.
Taxonomically of when the Homo sapien exists versus whatever the pre-hominid version of Homo sapien was. I can't remember what it's called. But I'm curious if you like know, do you know like how far back we're at with the Homo sapien development or anything? Like, are you interested in Homo sapien development?
I'm fascinated by it. If I were to pick like a field of history that I'm really, or like archaeology that I'm interested in, it's prehistory. So I'm really not interested in too much past like the dawn of writing and stuff like that. So I know the dawn of Homo sapiens is way farther past that. You know, like we're talking like 150,000 years or something here. But I'm fascinated by it. I will also preface all of this by saying that like I'm far from an authority figure in it. I'm still kind of working to understand all of that stuff, and so I will, share what I can. But yes, I love that topic, and I think it's really interesting. And it's also, this is another great example of things being found that like things just keep getting older. I think Hancock wore like a shirt that said that to like one of the Joe Rogan debates, and I'm like, what are like, come on, things just keep getting older. I'm like, when we find something that is older than everything else, it is the oldest thing we have found up until we find something older than that.
Like, just think about what you're saying.
Yeah.
Back up and
like,
think about it.
No shit.
Notice how you always find your keys in the last place you look?
I was literally going to use that analogy. God damn it.
Usain Bolt is the fastest man ever until he's not.
Yeah, literally.
Dun,
like,
dun.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I guess, but like that doesn't really prove much. Where it's just like, like you said, your keys are in the last place you looked. So it's like until you lose your keys again and have to find them somewhere else. And so like if you things are going to keep getting older, and it's always, I don't know a single scientist who has ever said, this thing that we have found, this stone tool.
We found a census near him, and he has 1 written on it, so we know that this is it. This is the first one. Yeah.
I had a great idea today. I decided,
to count the Earth's population, and it is me, and that's it. Yep.
My name is Adam.
Yeah.
Hello.
I'm gonna go the missing
world.
link and create humanity, and we're gonna be good to go.
So like no scientist will say this thing that we have found that is the oldest is as old as it gets, and they will also not say it's gonna get a whole lot older, because both of those are ascientific. There's the space of saying like, I'm not even gonna say, honestly, I will leave it at just like, this is the oldest we have found so far. That's it.
I also hate when it comes to building ideas, if you're well researched in a thing, it takes a lot to move you from positions, and it should.
Yes.
And something that's very frustrating is if you have a particular side in a thing, I'm trying not to lean into modern examples, but like there might be like a particular conflict and there are 2 different sides, and say you're decently well read into it. It's like, I'm pretty supportive of this side. And then maybe like a story comes out and it's like, well, look at that. Isn't that bad? And you're like, yeah, that is kind of bad. And you're like, it's bad for your side. I was like, yeah, it is. So then how the do you still support them? It's like,
wait, yeah,
you think this
whoa.
is
yeah, literally.
Wait,
literally.
My whole mind is going to 180. Yeah, like there's a difference between finding something that there's like buckets of facts, right? Like if we found, that there was wheat 13,000 years ago in some farm, that's a lot different than finding evidence of agriculture like 250,000 years ago that like implicates like alien life, right?
Yeah,
These are two
like,
totally
whoa,
different things.
yeah.
Like one of these is like, yeah, okay. They're like, well, what about that? It's like, okay, that doesn't contradict anything I've said before.
Totally.
I don't know why you're attacking me.
It adds to my base of knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, like it continues to add to the scientific body that we are developing. And that, you know, it's really frustrating that, you know, so many of the alt history crowd people do view it as really black and white, because it isn't. I mean, even, you know, with myself, I'm someone who, you know, if you talk to one of them, I'm sure they'd tell you that, you know, I am one of the, you know, archaeological cabal who's being paid by the Smithsonian to lie to you, which I wish I was. I'm a Google debunker. But you know, the reason I tried to approach Ancient Apocalypse with like as open of a mind as I could is because I think that there is important space for discussion from people who are saying something that goes against the paradigm. I disagree with what he was saying, and I have evidence to back up that what he was saying was incorrect, but I think he brings up some great points. One of the things that I really love that Graham Hancock talks about is talking about how much the sea level has risen since the dawn of mankind. I mean, you know, 150,000 years Homo sapiens had been around on this planet. For the last 80,000, cognitive revolution and all that stuff.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll keep getting older. You know, and so like people love to live along waterways. We live along the oceans and stuff. I mean, just in the last 20,000 years, at the end of the last glacial maximum, the sea level has risen between 300 and 400 feet, which is a lot. So like, you know, there's sites in Maine that I love. There's the Blue Hill Bay archaeological site, which is now underwater. It's a paleo-indigenous site. It's about 6,000 or 7,000 years old, and it was a hunting ground that used to be an island and is now completely submerged. So like, there are sites that are underwater. That's fascinating. The other thing about it is like, every archaeologist also says that. Like, that's not a hot take from, you know, Graham Hancock. That's like, yeah, people have been around for a long time and the sea level rose and we like the ocean. So like, of course there's things under there, but it's also really hard to get to. Does that mean that we're going to go down there? There's going to be a huge, you know, paradigm shifting thing? We don't really have the evidence to support that that's going to be super likely, but I think it's important to actually look at the theories and weigh them not as, you know, the pseudoscientists do, where it's like, they're out to get you and they're trying to lie. And I know I can get, you know, fired up about the pseudo people, but also like, I want to look at it and be like, okay, but at the end of the day, what I think of this individual or not doesn't matter. I want to just look at the things they're saying, because that's really what matters. You can be a dick or not, and I'll argue with you about it, but like, what are you saying, and is it founded in reality?
There's a psychological reality of, I notice this a lot when people talk about hard truths, right? I notice this in the red pill community. People say things like, I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear. And then, but what they tell you is like, it's always like masturbatory power fantasies. You do want to hear them. They're like, they're derogatory in a way that makes you feel good. Like, they'll be like, your life is shit right now because you're lazy. You need to get out of your bed. You need to do something, right? They leave you, when somebody gives you like a hard truth, like you should come away feeling a bit like, oof, like uncomfortable, like, not like amped up and ready to go. And you notice the same thing. I imagine
I am turning my life around.
Exactly. Like, wow, what a hard truth. Yeah, crazy. When people talk about like paradigm shifts, or when people talk about like discoveries, like I imagine that like an actual scientific person who's like discovering things, like when a new discovery gets announced, there's a lot of like cool, like, and there's going to be some ego built into it, especially if you're published and you have some defense, but like there's like a lot of curiosity and excitement. It's like, oh shit, well, I wonder what this means. This is cool. When the other people are talking about paradigm shifts, they're never paradigm shifting. They're only paradigm shifting into the one that they already believe. It's not even a paradigm shift for them because there is no disconfirming evidence for them, right?
Wow, that's a good way of saying that.
They have a way of viewing the world, and any paradigm shift that they're talking about is just coming back to them. When was the last time you changed your mind about anything?
Yeah. That's a really good point. And like, you know, that's the thing of like, you know, trying to, you know, maintain an open mind with this stuff. A site that I've talked about that is pretty controversial in the archaeological world is the Cerutti Mastodon site. So it's a site, I think it dates back like 150,000 years in North America, that some say is evidence that there was some sort of hominid presence here. When I talked about it, I tried to be very careful of just like, I'm phrasing it as like, there is evidence for this and there is evidence against it. And I'm just talking about it. And I'm going to give you both sides of it and you can draw your own conclusions. It's a site that's been used from, you know, people like, you know, the pseudo-arc crowd, and then also from like actual scientists. And there's a lot of debate. The jury's out on it. But it's a site where they found, it's in California, they found a mastodon tusk that is like in the ground in such a way that it's like through a bunch of stones. And so it looks like it had to have been like placed there. And there's like some pounding stones and stuff. I did a video on it over 2 years ago, so my facts are a little bit blurry at this point. But like things like that I think are very genuinely interesting, where it's like, we got to talk about it. And like, even if the discussion of it is sort of just like, okay, we talked about it and there's not a lot of evidence and now we move on with our lives. But you know, that's the kind of thing where like, if for some reason, again, I don't think this is actually going to happen, at least I don't have any evidence for it, but like, let's say we suddenly found, you know, a camp, and it was a campfire, and there was like skulls of some, American, diverged human origin from 150,000 years ago. It would be that thing where it's like, oh, that tusk makes a lot more sense now. I'm not saying that's likely. I'm not even going to postulate what percentage of likeliness that would be, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we put that in, one of the folders on the shelf and be like, that's interesting. And then we go on with the actual work we're doing, and we wait until more evidence appears.
And the most annoying thing is the people that are the conspiracy brain people about it are, one, they're not only are they not making progress towards those discoveries, because they're not even working in the field at all, they're also in some ways like inhibiting any progress from being made. In looking at lockdowns are a thing over COVID, that I think there's a lot of stuff that happened around COVID that is ripe for some kind of retrospective analysis. Like, was it good to, do, for warp speed and vaccines? Did we lock down in ways that we could have guessed at the time were good or bad? I think there's a lot of material there where it's like, going forward, we could probably change the way that we do these things. Those conversations will never happen, though, and they can't, because the starting point is Fauci wanted to lock us down to destroy our lives and make everybody hate everybody and control society. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, like, if there was a thing to analyze here, it's figured we could have done it better or worse. Now all of the air is being given, the oxygen is being consumed by these crazy conspiratorial lunatics, and now we can't even talk about the actual shit going on.
That's a really good point, and it is exactly the same thing with the archaeology space, where it's like, the pervasive nature of the pseudo-archaeology crowd and how vicious and poorly founded it is has made it really hard to talk about any of like the differing stuff. I mean, like, Gunung Padang is a site that gained most of its modern notoriety from ancient apocalypse. You literally cannot find anything about that site without it being related to the conspiracies that were postulated in that series. And like every tweet about it, everything about it is like demanding that there needs to be more excavations and that the archaeologists there are part of a big cover up. And it's like, we can't even what if this site actually was, 10, 20,000 years old? We can't even talk about that now, because all it is like a witch hunt and like an accusation of, finger pointing and there needs to be more excavation everywhere. Absolutely. Every archaeologist, of course we want more excavation. That's how we get funding and publish papers and stuff. But like, it's done in a way where like it's used as a sword instead of a magnifying glass, where it's like, I want to just find, however I can cut you down and say that you were wrong, instead of being like, hey, this would be cool.
And then nobody even wants to like dig into it, because it's like, okay, well, here's this, but like, I mean, I guess you weren't even right. You just happened to say a thing that in hindsight ended up being correct, but not for any of the reasons why you thought. And then, it's very annoying and frustrating.
And that's the thing with like the, talking about sea level rise and, archaeology that's underwater and things like that, where it's like, that's not a hot take. Like, of course there is. Like, unless humans just popped into the planet, in the last 5,000 years, there's going to be archaeological sites that are underwater. But like, it almost, as someone who is pretty firmly in the archaeology space, it almost feels weird to talk about those things now, because they've been so co-opted by the sort of like, alt history crowd, that it almost doesn't feel like you're, talking about actual archaeology anymore, even though it is founded in reality. Because, and that was the thing that I said a lot in the Ancient Apocalypse series, where it's like, most of that theory, it's like a runaway train. I am totally with him at the station. I get on the train. I'm like, this is interesting. Like, all right, you're going to try and back this up. There's questions that we're asking that I think are fine questions. I don't think there's any stupid questions. And then just as it just goes increasingly off the rails, where it's like, there's a site where they think that they found, carbon dates that date back farther than this. And I'm like, okay, a lot of those dates were not, reliable, and we don't have a lot of evidence to actually support it. But I'm like, okay, maybe we continue to explore that. That's fine. And then by like episode 3, he's talking about like, stone blocks right out there, actually, in the Bimini Road and all that stuff. And it's like, that's literally just a geologic feature. Like, you are so, like, you started with, we need to look at underwater archaeological sites because there could be some really cool stuff down there, to, diving around in the Bahamas being like, wow, look at this big rock. And it's like, you're like, I was with you for the first 5%, and now we're just in a completely different place,
There's this horrible feeling when you're either watching a new content creator, or you're making a new friend, or you're listening to somebody, and I might be just brain poison, but it's like, oh, this person sounds smart, everything seems okay, they're still going, and then eventually they'll say a thing and it's like, god damn it.
Yep.
You were lucky. You're lucky up to this point, and you're actually our moron.
I know the feeling. The one
Yeah.
that I experienced that the most with is like homesteading content. I'm granola crunchy, kind of back to the earther.
homesteading content.
And I love it. Like I love all
so
the natural
bad, but
stuff.
it's so
And I'm like,
great.
I'll start watching a video and it's like, someone cooking something or gardening and giving like tips, and then it ends with like,
Drink whole milk. And
yeah,
you're like,
and it's like, oh boy. And then, they start talking about, vaccines and how like, you can, I don't put sunscreen on my children. And then, it ends with like a Bible passage. And I'm like, oh,
You know what? I always said I at least give those people credit, because if you were a guy, if you're coming out here, okay, and you're like, I can live off the land and I don't need any GMO shit or whatever, and I don't trust vaccines because I don't want to put anything on. You know what? I think you're dumb, but you get props for that. Okay. What I don't like
Consistent.
are the 300-pound McDonald's consuming cocaine on the weekend people who are like, I don't want to put any of that toxic shit in my body, and it's like, stop. You
practice
okay?
what you preach.
Yeah, exactly. Get me out of here. You're careful about what you put into your body. What Joe Rogan supplement did you just buy? Yeah, get out of here.
Yeah,
Right? I don't trust the experimental vaccines, but you better believe I love those monoclonal antibodies. Like both of these things were emergency use authorization. And the monoclonal antibodies didn't even turn out to work, and they're more expensive. So if the FDA or Big Pharma wanted to steal your money, wouldn't they be pressing the more expensive thing? Like it's just
crazy.
Yeah.
Or like they are buying out like horse ivermectin. Now in the States, it's wild. When I came to the States, I was buying horse like dewormer or whatever, and then I noticed that ivermectin was locked up, whereas in Canada none of these things are locked up. You could just like
Welcome to the USA,
but people were like,
baby.
they were selling and being stolen at such a high rate that like ivermectin is now behind like a glass
Oh
locked
my
wall in the
God.
equine stores.
It is. It's madness. And I like what you said there, where it's like, if you have equal chances of dying of, skin cancer, polio, and crop blight, and you're really committing to that, I kind of respect it.
I do respect that.
Good for you.
Homesteaders, yes.
Homesteaders.
I love their quail farms. They're so cute. God, it's amazing.
I know those little eggs. Jesus.
They're surviving though. If the world goes down, those
Yeah,
people-
I know. They're going to be the ones laughing. So, yeah.
And they'll
Trying to get
never
on
bring
that.
back vaccines. That's the worst
Minus
part.
the fascism.
The
yeah.
next civilization coming up, no vaccines.
Polio, it's so back. Man.
with RFK as the president of that new civilization. Yeah.
But he's so ripped. It's crazy. Did you see the pictures of him pressing?
The only thing I can see when I think of RFK is him in that posture, sitting back in his chair, used as a meme to talk about the bear thing in Central Park.
Oh my God, yeah. What is with that?
Now, every single time there's like a thing that's posted on Twitter, it'll be like new whales found or whatever. There's just like a meme reply where you quote tweet it and you just post the picture of RFK doing this, like he's about to explain why he's the one who buried the guy in the iceberg 5,000 years ago or some
That's
shit. I was like,
hilarious.
okay, yeah.
Okay, I don't think you actually said who's your favorite person to debunk.
Oh, my favorite person to debunk.
Jesus.
That's
name
tough.
names.
That's tough. That's really
don't actually
tough.
have to name
I
names.
think honestly, it's fresh in my mind. Maybe it's just because I'm working on it, but I do think it would be the Philip Zeba video. Because in the grand scheme of things, like my heart is with him. Like he's someone who I genuinely feel like there is reason to make a video. Not only debunking his content, but imploring him to be like, hey, here's how you can do better and why you should. And like, I'm on your side at the end of the day. Because like
buddy.
with someone, like in Ancient Apocalypse, I'm never going to change his mind. I'm never going to change his mind. Like he's written books on it. He's on, he is raking it in. There's no reason to change his mind. But for a smaller creator who like, I could actually maybe make him, stop spreading some of the misinformation and, be able to teach a few people along the way. So I think he'd probably be my favorite.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's good. I like the videos are very funny.
Thank you.
It's actually funny because he used to come up on my feed all the time. I don't know what happened when I started watching animal TikToks, but I just got like more and more conspiracy TikToks coming up, and I was like, I don't want this. I don't want this. And I'd be like,
The
just give
animal
me.
to conspiracy pipeline.
Yeah. It was that and like lesbian thirst traps. They were just like filling my phone, and I was like, I don't know what's happening.
The
here.
duality of man.
Yes, Julie. Duality of woman.
The duality of woman.
Yeah, it's so annoying how everything is so connected now. Like you're like going to the gym is like right wing. It's just like
Yes.
like everything is like some weird. Or like I said, if you're arguing with people, you should just ask them like, what do you think about dinosaurs? And you'd be surprised at how quickly you get
much
strange.
bullshit.
That's crazy.
I didn't know this is a controversial thing now. I must have missed the wagon on that. Yeah.
It is, and that's the funny thing that I think it all comes back to is like we're talking about politicization of everything, and like it really is just a big comedy now. Like everything is someone's co-opted it for something or another thing, and it's great to have these discussions. But then when you kind of pull back and you get the bird's eye view, it's like, Man, this is just ridiculous.
It's not good. I said this a couple years ago, I think, where I was like, nothing can happen anymore. That's just a thing. There's always everything. Yeah.
And you said that a couple years ago, and it's only got more right.
It's every single thing. The Hawaii fires and the Jewish space
Hawaii
flares.
fires.
God, I
the
know,
East
man.
Palestine train derailment in Ohio, I think, was like caused by people trying to burn chemicals and destroy the whatever.
Wait, but that one was true.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
Yeah, the boat crashing. There was a boat that crashed into a bridge, I think, like a couple months ago, and people were saying that the Mossad was doing it to get away, attention. Like every single thing is a
Biden
conspiracy.
drove the boat into the bridge.
Yeah.
He
was there.
got brain damage
I
now.
saw him.
And it's like nothing can happen. Like maybe like things.
Like the benign isn't possible anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Or
nobody...
just like the most likely explanation.
Yeah.
Like can't possibly be.
Yeah, Occam's razor. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist anymore.
It feels like, did you ever have like that friend where if you were like texting them or something, they'd be like, well, what did you mean by like this and this? And it'd be like some like random comment you made that was just like a joke. And you're like, I don't know, I was just like joking. They're like, yeah,
Yes.
but you know that I
That's
feel
Kyla to
this
me.
way and this way and this way.
I'm just kidding. I'm just
This is
kidding.
actually how we message back and
Yeah.
forth. He'll be like, I don't know.
What do
And
you
I'm
mean
like,
by that?
What did you mean by that? Because 2 weeks ago on a Friday, you also said, I don't know. And I think that these are connected.
Wow, pattern-seeking behavior.
Patternicity.
It's an amazing thing.
It's at the core of everything, really.
Oh, man.
This is totally unrelated. It's very related to what you just said, but it's on a personal level. Yeah,
Uh-oh,
it's
I'm
actually
stressed.
one of the most frustrating things is when another person is upset for my own personal temperament. I usually don't care the next day. Whatever I'm upset about, if I sleep and I wake up, I just don't care anymore. But if the other person is still upset and they think I'm upset, the way that they engage with you is they'll be like, oh, like, how are you doing today? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm cool, or whatever, what's up? And they're like, okay. And then they'll be like, why did you answer so short? And I was like, no, I didn't. It was a normal answer. It's like, you're being kind of short now. Like, are you upset? Like, you seem like you're still mad. I was like, no, I don't think so. And
There's
like,
no way out.
Are you sure?
There's
yeah,
no
and
way out.
eventually it will get to the point. It's like, I'm f***ing fine. Why the
now
f***
I'm
are you?
mad at
And
you.
it's like, you are mad. And it's like,
shit,
no.
you are pissed. It's like, no, you're
projecting
instigating
this
me.
onto me.
Yeah.
And now you've made me mad because of your pattern in your mind. I don't need this. I don't need you to impose this on me. You've done this.
You've done this.
You've done this, yeah. And people will go into things looking for the information they already want to find. And man, the world is big and the information is huge, and there's a lot of stuff on the planet you can find.
Yeah,
whatever
there's
you want.
so much information that like you can't process it all, so it's easier to just pick something that already confirmation bias.
I'm be so curious. One thing I noticed, so I take anxiety meds because I'm a little ball of anxiety without it. But one thing I noticed is my thinking on and off my medication, because I take a really, really low dosage of SSRIs, but like literally when I started them, it was like my world changed where I was like, oh, I don't feel like incessantly anxious when like Nick wakes up and he's like, hey, how's it going? And I'm just like, oh God, he hates me
He's
today.
gonna kill me.
Whereas like now it's like those thoughts aren't even in my mind
Wow.
anymore, right? They're not there. And
So
then
this is how it's supposed to work.
oh, that's how normal people work. I thought my social anxiety was just politeness. Turns out I'm just a moron. But I'm super curious. I'd be interested to look at conspiracy theorists and like specifically like not just because there's anxiety kind of branches in two ways. And maybe I'm just projecting because anxiety, when we think of it, is like worry, right? Like I'm worried about the stove being on or all these things. Whereas there's often a really physiological component, and some people will experience anxiety at just a physiological level, which kind of oftentimes post hoc creates the cognitive stuff. Although sometimes for people they experience mostly the cognitive stuff and it gives them the gut pain and stuff like that. So IBS is a symptom of anxiety, but also anxiety is a symptom of IBS, right?
Feedback loop.
It's the feedback loop. And so when I look at like conspiracy theorists, especially because it's often male dominated, and we know that particularly like neurotic emotions in men are oftentimes expressed very differently than in the way that psychology.
Oh, that's interesting.
So depression in men is anhedonia typically. So when we think depression, we think of like a sad girl like crying, listening to Evanescence and like cutting her wrists, right? That's what we think of with depression. When we think about depression for men though, what you should be thinking of is being cool and harsh towards your friends and family and finding no pleasure in anything.
Wow.
That's typically how depression expresses in men.
Wow.
Right? Anxiety is very similar. You're typically going to see irritability and like paranoia, whereas anxiety for women is often going to be like clinginess and like worry attachment, stuff like that. And so I often like look at conspiracy theory spaces and I wonder how much like physiological anxiety is going on. Like how much terror do these people experience on like a day by day basis, and they're finding a way to take their terror out of their body and put it onto the world, because in many ways it's easier to see your terror out there than inside and like under the bed.
Wow, that is a really interesting way of looking at that. I never thought about it. I that actually is kind of develops pretty significantly a thought that I've had that kind of, cuts into that a little bit, where like one of the jokes that I've made when, doing some of my debunking videos is like, I would love to read a psych evaluation of this person. Like, what is going on in their head? And I always kind of say that as like an off chance, mostly in reference to all the things we've been talking about here, like, all the, the biases and the fallacies and all that, where I'm like, how do you not see this? But really that's a really interesting point. And like, I never really even thought about how, depression and anxiety and things like that would manifest differently in, a man's body versus a woman's. But that would play into it a lot. And, it's the kind of thing where I think about it and I'm like, how it must be exhausting. Like, it really must be exhausting to be that fearful of the world. And like, that is not, I obviously don't want this to sound like I'm being harsh and, like coming down on people with mental illness, but like, that is not like a normal way to view the world, that everyone is out to get you at all times, that there is a big cabal of archaeology that is out to like hide something from you. Like, that is just not a normal way to think. Like, that is just a very unusual mindset and thought process. And I've always kind of wondered, like, what's up with that? And I've never really developed it to that point. But to your point of like, it is a lot of men, and there's a lot less men who are diagnosed with depression and anxiety, because we do think of it as, listening to Evanescence in your room and crying. And I wouldn't be surprised even if not all, if a lot of people in that space are sort of manifesting it, because it's, that anxiety and that paranoia for the world around you is manifesting in a way that's much more aggressive than it would in a woman. And I don't know if that's, pseudo, philosophy there, but
it's easier, right? Like, if you're anxious about your partner hating you, it's easier than like looking into me and like, why am I anxious in myself? Because the answer is really hard to find. Like, it's like, I could be anxious because my gut flora is not very healthy today. I didn't get enough sleep, and like, I ate, too many processed foods yesterday. The gummy bears are making my stomach upset. It's a lot easier to be like, well, my partner's doing this novel thing. Patterns.
And I hate that.
Patterns, right? And
he said, thanks on Friday.
Yeah. He said, I don't know on Friday, and I know. And I wonder if if it's more traditional that like a femme person might project that onto other people, whereas men might project that more often onto like society and stuff like that. And I'm not sure. I'm just postulating.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting theory. And, again, that would, add to that feedback loop where it's like, if you've really convinced yourself that there's a big cabal of archaeology out to get you, like, how do you get off that? Like, what would it take to convince you that that's not true? Like, you've already convinced yourself, and you're only going to look for evidence that there is. And I don't even know what evidence you could provide to prove that there isn't.
And speaking of self-reinforcing your own belief system, anxiety is a self-reinforcing system as well. I know I'm just bolstering my own hypothesis now over and over.
No, but you're using your expertise with it. That's more than just, you're like, not picking and choosing.
Metacognitions of anxiety are really tricky, and anxiety's notoriously hard to treat because, you'll have I remember I had this client who had really bad anxiety, and they would, when they sent their kid to daycare, they would send 32 extra diapers. And I was like,
whoa.
Why?
Wow.
And it was like,
that kid is shitting.
And that's their kid was shitting a lot, okay? And that was like a really good example of like their entire life, like over preparing, and it was consuming their life, right? And it led to a lot of really maladaptive behaviors, right? And when I go like, well, why are you doing that? The client would be like, well, what if I run out of diapers one day? What if one day he needs extra diapers because he's shitting himself a lot, right? And that persists for the next 3 weeks, and I forget to refill it for the next 3 weeks, and then I send him to daycare, and he has no diapers. I'm like, A, daycare probably has extra diapers, so you'd probably be good.
Yeah.
But B, you will never forget to restock your diapers. Like
that is the last problem you're gonna have.
Right. But the problem with anxiety loops and stuff like that is that you'd be like, oh, I should be really cautious about doing this thing. And then because you're cautious, it maybe prevents some of the time this thing from occurring. But it's like, the anxiety loop didn't protect you from that. And also you avoid a whole bunch of things, or you assume a bunch of things that never actually come to fruition that you just forget about, because we tend to be reinforced by these types of things.
I think that there's an interesting way where, like you have like I don't know if this would be like first order and second order, but you have these things like anxiety. And I think that there are ways where we can say the words, but then when we look at how they're manifesting, that's not actually the underlying behavior. So like, I bet there are some people that have, because this is actually something I use to fight against these people a lot. I bet there are some people that do have anxiety or issues with the world, and then they project that, and this leads them to some like crazy conspiratorial belief. But I feel like 95% of people that are in these holes don't have these things because they don't exhibit the behaviors that you would expect somebody to if they were genuinely as paranoid and fearful as they are. As somebody that's known some people that have some whatever things with like paranoia tendencies or whatever, like when you watch somebody like this function in the world, they are genuinely crazy. They will literally have these ideas about how like these people are to get them, and it's a lot of stuff that they're like it's crippling. I mean, I'm probably DSM diagnostic is like literally impeding their ability to live an ordinary life, to function as an ordinary person. And I asked this, my debate with Jordan Peterson, where he's telling me about how he doesn't trust the World Economic Forum and the EPA and the FDA. And I think the question I asked is like, why do you? Because it had to do with like he doesn't trust any of these institutions, and I'm like, well, why do you start your car every day, right? Because like this is it's tons of explosions. It's explosions that are happening in a block that's like hurtling you down the road.
It's right in front of you.
3,000 pound like metal box. Like how many different people have you? And he's like, well, I start my car every day, so I know it'll start. Okay, well, what if the first time you start your car, right? Like, if these people, it goes back to the vaccine thing I said before. If these people's anxieties were to manifest in other ways, I would believe it. But I feel like it's more they're finding communities of people they fit into. And even though they have all these crazy conspiracies that are necessary for like the group buy-in, I don't think they believe in any of it because it doesn't manifest in their life in any appreciable way. Like, well, I just saw you take an ibuprofen. Why the fuck are you taking that? Like that drug that the big pharma is selling you. Like what the fuck? Why is your loser on in chemo? Don't you know that stuff is poison for you? Like what the is wrong with you? Yeah, exactly. And it's like show me the consistent line of behaviors where you're actually genuinely anxious and worried, because it seems more like what's happening is, even though, and this goes back to the example I used before about like hard truths are things that just make you feel good, right? And a lot of these guys will say this, like, I'm going to tell you like really uncomfortable things about reality. Generally, the way that it works is every uncomfortable thing that they're saying is simultaneously increasing your agency in that it's giving you the ability to like control your future. And it's also taking away your responsibility at the same time, right? Oh, you can't find a girlfriend? Well, let me tell you some hard truths. All women are cunts and are evil, and they're brainwashed by feminism, and they have high testosterone. And now I'm going to tell you how to do it. It's like, oh, okay. Well, firstly, that hard truth. Whew,
so it's not my fault.
Exactly.
It's all their fault.
That's a huge weight off my chest.
God
Jesus
for that.
Christ. And it's like, oh, you can't find the research to substantiate any of your claims. It's because big pharma, big FDA, basically anytime there's big anything, it's always stupid, right? It's hiding. Okay, well, thank God, right? So they disguise these things as like uncomfortable things, and it might seem like, oh, well, maybe people have anxiety, so they're looking for these things. But I don't think they do, because it doesn't manifest in any other area in their life. It's just like stuff that makes you feel good. It's just like preaching and preaching and preaching, and you're like,
and I think that is a good distinction to make. And I definitely think that this is something that it's a very interesting like theory, and I'm sure that there are cases where it exists. But I do think that it's good to I think temper ourselves with it, because like misdiagnosing and diagnosing with a brush is a very dangerous thing. So obviously,
there definitely
look at the
are
camera.
online communities.
I am not implying anything here. This is not a accusation towards an entire community.
I do think there are communities, though, especially online, where there are people, and it's like, this is you. A lot of you are mentally ill. Okay.
Yeah. No.
It's time to log off.
And I feel like it happens a lot. Yeah. And like I don't know a lot about like the communities, because we only see the mouthpieces. Like we only see like specific individuals.
That's a really big part, right?
So it's like I
might
can't
not be the
speak
same.
for like what a bunch of people on the internet who listen to a person think. I will never try and do that. But like if there is there are some people who I can think of off the dome in the pseudo space who are, I'm like, this is abnormal behavior. It is not all of them. It is far from all of them. And like I don't want it to even sound like, and like there are people like that in my neck of the woods. Like there's people like that everywhere. And I think that that's really it's just interesting to see how that manifests within sort of the conspiracy space, because it manifests differently in the I guess scientific world, and it still exists there, and it will still manifest. And I'm sure there's people who they will die on the hill of whatever study they've done, and they're just using the academic thing as a tool for whatever they're doing.
Well, that's true though, and because this is what I want people to keep in mind. The people that are genuinely crazy or have the crazy beliefs aren't usually the ones that end up becoming the popular purveyors of disinformation. No. I think it's people that are usually far more intentional in how they...
Malicious.
Yeah, because it's like, because there are people where it's like, okay, you're an anti-establishment guy. Like, what are the chances that every single fucking thing you're saying aligns 100% with every other major thing that these people are saying, right? There are some people that I see, I was like, ooh, this dude's crazy, but they are crazy. And you can tell because there are times where they'll like completely buck the people that you'd ordinarily expect to be in their camp. But it's like, there's no way that you're insane and you believe these crazy and you just so happen to be 100% in alignment with every other major belief that this whole contingent of people, I don't believe that. Bullshit. There's more intentionality here, right?
That's interesting. And that's something that I've really struggled with a lot in trying to do like the psychology side of this. Again, I'm an archaeologist, I'm an environmental scientist. That's really where my expertise comes in. And I'm a little bit too sort of, despite how I may come across on the internet, I'm a little bit too forgiving of a person. And I give a lot of the benefit of the doubt. And so that's something that's really hindered my ability to be able to tell if someone within the space is genuinely saying something because they believe it, or if they're trying to, be malicious, or if they're just sort of like extrapolating what they believe to draw in a broader audience. I'm really bad at being able to tell that.
I think it's interesting, going back a little bit to the anxiety stuff of you being like, well, it's not just that. What's important to understand, a lot of people would say like trauma makes people addicted. And it's like, the evidence for that isn't great. Most people with addiction have trauma. Most people with trauma don't have addiction, right? Most people with anxiety don't have crazy conspiracy theories that they believe in. Although I wouldn't be surprised to find out that most conspiracy theorists have high anxiety at the same time, right? Said. And it's also really important to understand, like in all of this, that like no mental health condition is a carte blanche kind of moral protection from behavior that you do, right? It makes it potentially more understandable. It gives you like a wedge into having empathy for the group, right? When I look at the incel group, I have a high amount of empathy. The autism rates are through the charts, right? Anxiety and depression rates and suicide rates off the charts. Also, being a misogynistic asshole and hating women is still inexcusable. It's still wrong.
Yeah. Those can both be true.
And I understand, right? And so it's like, it's important to understand some of the psychological factors that might lead them into. But I think what happens, and this is a really common failing in like the psychology field, is being like, well, they're just anxious. And it's like, it's understandable, but it doesn't make the behavior excusable. You don't get to just like be like, they're just anxious. Of course they believe in lizards, like lizard elites, like of course. And it's like, no, not
especially
of course.
when it ends up that like it could actually have like real like danger to the world.
Right.
Like, obviously it is, horrible that, people within that, space in like the incel world have like higher rates of suicide and self-harm and things like that. But like can also be like that hatred towards women can be a danger to innocent people. Like, I mean, we've seen that happen before. And like, that's terrifying. Yes, the mental illness that they are suffering from is something that is needs to be treated, and it needs to be something which is normalized, so it can be talked about, and it needs to be something that they can find help with. And you can still talk about how terrible the way that it is manifesting is. And that's a really hard thing to do because it's hard to pick one or the other, because we do view things as black and white. And that's really the hard thing. Is we talked a lot about like things being black and white throughout this whole conversation. And like I think the elephant in the room, which we didn't even touch on, is like, we're programmed to do that. Like, it is pattern recognition. The whole thing of doing like black and white, like it's 0%, 50% or 100%, like our brains are not made to do the nuance of like, well, it's a little bit this and a little bit that, but mostly it's this. It's like, no, it is that. And like, that's just not the way it works. And that's really bad, because then it's super harmful in sort of no matter what camp you're in. If you're willing to, forgive anything an individual does because of their mental illness, they will probably, or they may never end up actually getting the help they need and could hurt themselves and others. And if you're willing to only like attack them for that, then they're never going to get the help they need. So again, this is not my field, so I'm kind of just, preaching from my soapbox here with literally no basis in anything. But like it's an interesting, dilemma.
Yeah. It's kind of like the human brain is, and like the way the human psyche works is like, it's almost like wine testing. Like, if you give me a Merlot that's really expensive or really cheap, I have no fucking clue. Like, I'm not going to know, because I'm not like, my palate isn't trained on it. I don't think about that. I have no level of nuance. And I think for a lot of people, nuance isn't really like the predilection of people, because heuristics and patterns are, especially fast, quick, which is what heuristics are. And so it's important to recognize, like, being a nuanced thinker in the same way of being like a nuanced wine drinker. It takes like a skill. It takes like building it up. It takes like researching and understanding, like building the skills and like the exposure necessary to be able to like parse through and be like, yes, I can taste the aged whatever. I don't know. I don't even know what wine connoisseurs say, but it feels like something that has to be built up. And it goes back to the question of, well, how do you do this? And it's hard because it's not very reinforced within society right now.
Yeah.
Which is why we need to execute people that don't actually. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
It all comes back.
And it all comes back to
capital punishment.
capital punishment, death,
No
and
punishment is
civil
death.
war.
You said something wrong on Twitter, death.
This is going to turn into the Tim Pool episode where we just say Civil War. It's coming.
Civil War. It's coming.
Oh my God.
Do you have any last questions?
Nope. Where do we find you?
Well, you can find me on YouTube primarily, and TikTok and Instagram as well, at MiniMinuteMan, MiniMinuteMan. I talk about archaeology, environmental science, and some good old conspiracy debunking. My long form stuff is all on YouTube, and you can find my shorts on TikTok, Instagram, and I guess YouTube shorts as well. But come check me out. Good stuff going on over there, and plenty more where this came from.
Anything coming up that you're excited for?
Relaunch of Dark Roots, my documentary series, a deep history of the United States, visiting archaeological sites, geologic sites, talking about why they are there, history of, human engagement in the areas, colonial
Just as a quick,
history.
when you say history of the United States, do you mean like of this continent, like way a long time ago, or do you mean like in the past 250 years?
Yes, of the continent.
Okay.
So
Okay.
History, I guess, of continental North America.
Yeah, okay,
I
gotcha,
suppose would
okay.
be.
But you say history of the United States, like, so the United States, 10,000 BC.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, United States, circa 2 million years ago.
Yeah.
So
bald eagle flies
that'll be,
over.
Yeah. So
But he's a dinosaur.
that'll be
Sorry.
coming back in, shortly. But that's a little bit more of what I've talked about of trying to teach more actual facts and bog myself down less with conspiracy. So yeah, cool. But this has been a pleasure. Thank you guys very much. This has been really lovely, and thank you all for tuning in and watching. This has been a real fun time.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
If you guys enjoy Bridges, I highly recommend you check out our Patreon. Go to our Patreon, by the way. We will post early access to every single VOD, as well as posting little clips. Not clips. I just made that up. I don't even know why I said that. We post little images so that you can ask questions to upcoming guests. And I also am brainstorming a couple of events that I would like to do in the future, and you'll get early access to buying tickets and probably deals, assuming I can work with Ticketmaster to make that happen. We're also sponsored by Ground News and Skillshare. Ground News is a great news source. I talk about it all the time. Description down below. Skillshare, I also talk about it all the time, to be honest. Down below, it's basically a community where you share DIY. Homesteaders, okay? Homesteaders are there. Learn.
With less fascism.
Less fascism, less anti-vaccines, more quails, okay? It's great.
More quails. Skillshare, more quails.
Thank you. Thank you, Milo, for being on. We appreciate having you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
The news is divided. Ground News puts it back together, so you can see how many sources are reporting on any breaking story, where they fall on the political spectrum, how reliable they are, and who owns them. Compare headlines and read full articles to see which details are prioritized, exaggerated, or left out entirely. Because the more we understand the media, the more we'll understand each other. Visit ground.news to learn more.